February 26, 1991, 73 Easting, Iraq. The desert night had fallen like a curtain of ink across the vast emptiness of the Iraqi desert. Through the thermal imaging system of his M1A1 Abrams, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Thornton could see what others could not. The world appeared in ghostly green, white, and black. Heat signatures of enemy vehicles emerged from the darkness like specters. Ghost 6 to all units. Maintain formation. Watch your spacing. His voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The radio crackled with acknowledgments from his tank commanders. The massive steel beasts rolled forward in perfect formation, their 120mm main guns scanning the horizon. Intelligence had reported elements of the Iraqi Republican Guard's Tawakalna division were positioned somewhere ahead, but the sandstorm that had raged throughout the day had eliminated any chance of air reconnaissance. Thornton's tank led the formation. As commander of Eagle Troop, 2nd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, he trained his men relentlessly for this moment. 29 years old at the time, he was already considered one of the Army's most promising armor officers. "Contact front!" The urgent voice of his gunner cut through the radio silence. "Multiple T-72s at 180. Thornton's eyes narrowed as he peered through his commander's sight. The thermal signature was unmistakable. Iraqi T-72 tanks, their engines hot, were arranged in a defensive posture less than 2,000 meters ahead. They hadn't spotted the American formation yet. "All units, weapons free," Thornton ordered. "Fire at will, take them down." The night erupted in chaos as the first American tanks opened fire. The battlefield illuminated with muzzle flashes and explosions. The sound of the Abrams main gun was deafening even inside the protective shell of the tank. "Driver, move forward. Gunner, target at 175. Tank, fire when ready." The 120mm main gun roared, sending a depleted uranium round downrange at nearly a mile per second. Through his sight, Thornton watched as the Iraqi tank erupted in flames, its turret blown completely off the chassis. What followed was not a battle but an execution. The American tanks, with their superior technology and training, methodically destroyed the Iraqi armor. Thermal imaging allowed them to engage targets the Iraqis couldn't even see. The Abrams depleted uranium rounds punched through the Soviet-made T-72 armor like it was paper. "Ghost 6, this is Ghost 3. We're taking fire from the ridge to our east." Thornton swiveled his periscope. More Iraqi tanks had appeared, attempting to flank their position. "All units, shift fire, targets east. Ghost 4 and 5, maintain fire on original targets." The battle continued for what seemed like hours, but was in reality less than 30 minutes. The night sky was illuminated by burning Iraqi vehicles, casting an eerie glow across the desert. Then it happened. "Ghost 6, this is Ghost 2, taking heavy fire, direct hit, penetration of..." The transmission cut off abruptly. Thornton's heart sank as he spotted Ghost 2 through his sight. The Abrams had taken a hit to its side armor. While it hadn't destroyed the tank, smoke poured from the crew compartment. "Ghost 6 to Ghost 2, report status." No response came. Without hesitation, Thornton made his decision. "All units, suppressive fire on that ridge. Driver, move to Ghost 2's position. Now." His driver complied immediately, and the massive tank lurched forward, accelerating across the desert floor. Sand kicked up behind them as they raced toward the stricken tank. "Gunner, maintain fire on any threats. Target anything that moves." They reached Ghost 2 in under a minute. Thornton could see flames beginning to lick at the tank's engine compartment. Without a second thought, he popped his hatch and climbed out, exposing himself to enemy fire. Bullets pinged off the hull of the tank as he made his way to Ghost 2. The tank's commander, Captain Miller, was already outside, dragging his gunner clear. Both men were bloodied but alive. "The driver and loader are still inside," Miller shouted over the din of battle. Thornton nodded and climbed onto the burning Abrams. He dropped into the commander's hatch, descending into a world of smoke and chaos. The loader was unconscious but breathing. The driver was pinned in his seat, blood streaming from a head wound. With strength born of desperation, Thornton freed the driver and hoisted him up through the hatch. Hands appeared above him as Miller and his gunner helped pull the injured man clear. Returning for the loader, Thornton managed to drag him up and out just as the ammunition began to cook off. The explosion threw Thornton clear of the tank. He landed hard on the desert floor, the wind knocked from his lungs. For a moment he lay there, certain he was dead. Then hands were pulling him up, dragging him back toward his own tank. Colonel, are you all right?" Thornton managed to nod, though blood streamed from a gash on his forehead. His ears rang from the explosion, but he could still hear the battle raging around them. "Get them to the medical track," he ordered, gesturing to the wounded crew of Ghost 2, "and get me back to my tank." Despite protests from Miller, Thornton returned to Ghost 6 and resumed command. The battle continued for another hour, resulting in the destruction of nearly an entire Iraqi battalion without a single American fatality. What would later be known as the Battle of 73 Easting entered military history as one of the most lopsided victories in modern warfare. Eagle Troop alone had destroyed 28 Iraqi tanks, 16 personnel carriers, and over 30 trucks in less than half an hour. And Lieutenant Colonel Jack Thunder Thornton had become a legend in the armor community, not just for his tactical brilliance, but for the moment he'd abandoned the safety of his command to save 4 men who would have otherwise perished. For Thornton, it was simply what had to be done. For his men, it was something they would never forget. 34 years later, Pentagon, Washington, D.C., March 15, 2025. Colonel Jack Thornton, now 58 years old, sat ramrod straight in the chair outside the office of General William Montgomery, Army Chief of Staff. The years had turned his once dark hair silver, and lines of experience were etched into his weathered face. But his blue eyes retained the same intensity they had held in the deserts of Iraq all those years ago. The secretary glanced at him occasionally, clearly wondering why a decorated armor officer nearing retirement age had been summoned to meet with the Army's highest-ranking officer. Thornton wondered the same thing. His career had been distinguished by any measure. After Desert Storm, he'd risen steadily through the ranks, commanding at every level. He'd led tanks in Iraq again during Operation Iraqi Freedom, earning further decorations for valor. Along the way, he'd gained a reputation as an officer who spoke his mind, even when his views ran counter to prevailing wisdom. It was that quality that had likely kept him from earning his first star. Now, with retirement just months away, he wondered what Montgomery wanted. They had served together in Iraq, with Montgomery as his battalion commander during the 73 Easting Battle. They had remained friends over the years, though their paths had diverged. "The general will see you now, Colonel," the secretary said, interrupting his thoughts. Thornton nodded and stood, straightening his uniform before entering the office. Inside, General Montgomery was not alone. A man in civilian clothes stood looking out the window at the Potomac River. He turned as Thornton entered, and the colonel immediately recognized Secretary of Defense Richard Hamilton. Thornton came to attention and saluted. "General Montgomery, Mr. Secretary." "At ease, Jack," Montgomery said, returning the salute. "Take a seat." As Thornton sat, he noted that Montgomery looked tired, the weight of his position evident in the dark circles under his eyes. Whatever this meeting was about, it wasn't routine. "How's the knee holding up?" Montgomery asked, referencing the injury Thornton had sustained in Iraq in 2005. "Still attached, sir. Can't ask for much more." Montgomery nodded, then glanced at the Secretary of Defense, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Jack, we've got a situation, one that requires your particular expertise." Montgomery stood and moved to a display screen on the wall. With a touch, it came to life, showing a map of Fort Knox, Kentucky. "You're aware of the Sullivan Cup, I assume?" "Yes, sir. Best tank crew competition. Held every 2 years at Fort Benning, though I heard they've moved it to Knox now." "That's right. And you're also aware of the current debate within the Army regarding the future of armor?" Thornton's jaw tightened slightly. "I've heard rumors about budget cuts to the armor branch, sir. Something about shifting resources to drone warfare and autonomous systems." Secretary Hamilton spoke for the first time. "It's more than rumors, Colonel. There's a strong push within the Pentagon and Congress to dramatically reduce funding for heavy armor. The argument is that the Ukraine conflict and recent Middle Eastern engagements have proven that tanks are increasingly vulnerable to modern anti-armor systems." Thornton bristled but kept his expression neutral. "With respect, Mr. Secretary, those conflicts have proven that tanks employed without proper tactical support are vulnerable, not that tanks themselves are obsolete." "I happen to agree with you," Hamilton said, "but the debate has moved beyond military circles. It's political now, and we're facing an uphill battle." Montgomery took over again. "The upcoming Sullivan Cup has taken on significance beyond a simple competition, Jack. It's become a proving ground for the future of American armor. The results will be heavily scrutinized by the Budget Committee and could influence funding decisions for years to come." Thornton was beginning to understand why he'd been summoned. "And where do I fit into this, sir?" Montgomery exchanged another glance with the secretary. We want you to command the Fort Knox Honor Guard tank platoon for the competition. Thornton blinked in surprise. The Honor Guard platoon was traditionally made up of the best tank crews from the armor school, serving as representatives for ceremonies and demonstrations. But they weren't typically competition crews. With all due respect, General, I'm scheduled to retire in 4 months. And while I appreciate the offer, surely there are younger officers better suited to the task. None with your experience or reputation, Montgomery said firmly, and none who understand what's at stake here the way you do. The secretary stepped forward. Colonel, let me be blunt. The future of American heavy armor may well hang in the balance. If the Sullivan Cup demonstrates the continued relevance of tanks on the modern battlefield, we can justify maintaining current funding levels. If not, we're looking at cuts of up to 40% over the next 5 years. 40%? Thornton couldn't hide his shock. That would effectively gut the armor branch. Precisely, Montgomery said, which is why we need our best. We need you, Jack. Thornton was silent for a long moment, processing what he was being asked to do. May I ask who else is competing? Montgomery touched the display screen again, and a face appeared that made Thornton's blood run cold. Colonel Robert Hayes will be commanding the Fort Benning team. They're the favorites to win. Hayes, the name alone was enough to ignite a slow burn in Thornton's gut. They had history, and none of it good. Hayes had served under Thornton in Iraq in 2005, where his disregard for Thornton's orders had resulted in the loss of an Abrams and the deaths of 2 crewmen. Hayes had somehow avoided a court-martial, and his career had flourished in the years since, largely due to his embrace of emerging technologies and his political connections. Hayes is the leading proponent of what they're calling the Future Combat Initiative, Secretary Hamilton explained. He believes heavy armor should be replaced entirely by lighter, autonomous systems and drone networks. And he's got the ear of half the Joint Chiefs and a third of Congress, Montgomery added grimly. Thornton understood now why they'd called him. This wasn't just about a tank competition. This was about the soul of the armor branch, the future of a tradition that dated back to World War II. And they'd chosen him to defend it against the man he considered the antithesis of everything a tank commander should be. When do I start? The words left his mouth before he'd fully processed the decision. Montgomery's relief was palpable. Immediately, you'll report to Fort Knox on Monday. You'll have 8 weeks to prepare your team for the competition. And who is my team, sir? Another touch of the screen brought up 4 personnel files. We've selected the crews based on a combination of experience and potential. Your primary command crew will consist of Lieutenant Jennifer Carter as your gunner, Sergeant First Class Marcus Washington as your loader, and Sergeant Cole Wilson as your driver. Thornton scanned the files quickly. Carter was a West Point graduate with top marks in gunnery but limited field experience. Washington was a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan with an impressive service record, though there was a note about a medical evaluation following an IED incident. Wilson was young with exceptional mechanical scores but several disciplinary infractions. Not exactly the dream team, Thornton remarked dryly. They're the best available on short notice, Montgomery said. The rest of the platoon consists of 3 other crews of similar composition. 16 personnel total under your command. Thornton nodded slowly, already formulating a training plan in his mind. And our equipment? Here, Montgomery hesitated. You'll be using M1A2 Abrams from the Knox training fleet. The older models? Thornton frowned. While Hayes and his team get the latest SCPV-4 variants, I assume? Budget constraints, the secretary said, not meeting Thornton's eye. But we have confidence in your ability to overcome any technical disadvantages. Of course they did. They were asking him to win a modern tank competition with outdated equipment and a crew he'd never worked with, against a man who had every advantage and a personal grudge against him. And all while the future of American armor hung in the balance. Just another day in the Army. I'll need full authority over the training schedule and access to all facilities at Knox, Thornton said. You'll have it, Montgomery assured him. Whatever you need within reason. Thornton stood, his decision made. Then I accept the command, sir. We'll be ready. As he left the Pentagon that afternoon, walking across the vast parking lot to his aging Ford F-150, Thornton felt a familiar sensation in his chest. Not the occasional pain from his old wounds, but the fire of purpose. For the first time in years, he had a mission that truly mattered. His retirement would have to wait. He had a battle to fight first. Fort Knox, Kentucky, March 18, 2025. The main briefing room at the Armor School was silent as Thornton studied the 4 soldiers standing at attention before him. These would be his primary crew, the tip of the spear for the upcoming competition. Through the windows, he could see the other 12 members of the platoon waiting outside, equally curious about their new commander. At ease, Thornton said finally. Take a seat. The four relaxed marginally and sat at the conference table. Thornton remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. I'm Colonel Jack Thornton. As of 0800 this morning, I've assumed command of the Fort Knox Honor Guard tank platoon with the specific mission of preparing for and competing in the Sullivan Cup tank crew competition 8 weeks from now. He paused, studying each face in turn. Lieutenant Jennifer Carter sat ramrod straight, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her expression attentive but revealing nothing. At 33, she was older than many lieutenants, having worked her way up through ROTC after serving as an enlisted intelligence specialist. Her file indicated top scores in gunnery training, but limited combat experience. Sergeant First Class Marcus Washington was a different story entirely. At 45, the loader had the weathered look of a career soldier. His dark skin was creased from years under the desert sun, and his powerful build spoke of the physical demands of his role. His eyes, however, were guarded, revealing a wariness that Thornton recognized from men who had seen too much combat. Sergeant Cole Wilson was the youngest at 25. The tank driver had the lean, coiled energy of an athlete and the slightly defiant set to his jaw that suggested authority issues. His technical scores were off the charts, but his disciplinary record showed multiple incidents of insubordination and one bar to re-enlistment that had been lifted only due to his exceptional skills. The fourth soldier was Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, who would command the second tank in the competition. At 31, he had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had been an instructor at Knox for the past 3 years. I'll be direct, Thornton continued. We face an uphill battle. The Fort Benning team is considered the favorite, with newer equipment and more experienced competition crews. We have 8 weeks to prove them wrong. He moved to a display screen and brought up images of the Sullivan Cup course. The competition consists of 5 phases: maintenance test, physical fitness test, navigation course, gunnery skills, and tactical exercise. We will excel in all 5. Lieutenant Carter raised her hand. Sir, if I may ask, what's your assessment of our primary competition? Fort Benning has won the last 3 cups. Thornton nodded, appreciating the direct question. Fort Benning will be led by Colonel Robert Hayes. He favors technology over fundamentals, relying heavily on advanced systems rather than crew cohesion and basic skills. That's where we'll beat him. With respect, sir, Wilson spoke up without raising his hand, aren't advanced systems the whole point? The SEPV-4 Abrams they'll be using has better fire control, better sensors, better everything. Thornton fixed the young sergeant with a steady gaze. The most advanced tank in the world is useless if the crew doesn't function as a unit. Sergeant, technology fails, sensors get damaged, systems malfunction. When that happens, it comes down to fundamentals. That's where we'll have the edge. Wilson didn't look convinced, but he nodded respectfully. Sir, Washington spoke for the first time, his deep voice filling the room. What tanks will we be using for the competition? M1A2s from the training fleet, not the latest models but solid platforms. We'll be running with the SEPV-2 variant. A murmur ran through the group. The SEPV-2, while still formidable, lacked many of the advanced features of the SEPV-4 that the Benning team would be using. So we're fighting with one hand tied behind our backs, Rodriguez said, voicing what they all were thinking. We're fighting with the tools we have, Sergeant, Thornton corrected, and those tools are more than adequate in the hands of a skilled crew. The Abrams is still the finest tank ever built, regardless of the variant. He paused, looking each of them in the eye. Make no mistake, this competition matters. The results will influence decisions about the future of armor in the Army. There are those who believe tanks are obsolete, that they should be replaced by drones and autonomous systems. Aren't they right? Wilson asked. I mean, look at Ukraine. Tanks getting picked off by drones and shoulder-launched missiles. Seems like heavy armor had its day. Thornton had expected this argument. What Ukraine proved is that tanks used improperly are vulnerable. Tanks without infantry support, without air cover, without proper tactics are indeed targets. But tanks used as part of a combined arms team remain the most formidable ground combat system on the battlefield. He brought up new images on the screen, these from recent conflicts. For every tank destroyed in Ukraine, there were dozens that performed their mission successfully. The media just doesn't show those. And in Gaza, Israeli Merkava tanks, when properly employed, proved decisive despite facing some of the most sophisticated anti-tank weapons in the world. Thornton turned off the display. But we're not here to debate military doctrine. We're here to win a competition. And to do that, we need to become the best tank crew in the Army in 8 weeks. He moved to a whiteboard and began outlining a training schedule. We start tomorrow at 0500, physical training followed by basic crew drills. I want to assess where each of you stands. In the afternoon, we'll move to the simulators to begin gunnery practice. Questions? Carter raised her hand again. Sir, will you be serving as the tank commander during the competition? That's correct, Lieutenant. I'll be TC on the primary competition tank. Lieutenant Carter as gunner. Farmer. Sergeant First Class Washington as loader, and Sergeant Wilson as driver. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will command our second tank with his own crew. Washington shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Colonel, if I may speak freely? Always, Sergeant. Your reputation precedes you, sir. Desert Storm, Iraq. You're a legend in the armor community. But with respect, combat tactics and competition skills aren't always the same thing. The Sullivan Cup has evolved into a very specific type of contest with its own quirks. Thornton appreciated the candor. Valid point, Sergeant, which is why I'll be relying heavily on all of you to bring me up to speed on the competition specifics. I know how to fight in a tank. You know how to win at Sullivan. Together, we'll develop a strategy that works. This seemed to satisfy Washington, who nodded respectfully. Any other questions? Thornton asked. When none were forthcoming, he nodded. Then get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. As the group filed out, Thornton noticed Washington lingering behind. Once they were alone, the sergeant approached. Permission to speak privately, sir? Granted. Thornton leaned against the conference table, curious. Washington seemed to struggle with his words for a moment. Sir, I should inform you that I served in Iraq in 2005. 3rd Infantry Division, 3rd Battalion. Thornton's interest sharpened immediately. You were at Ramadi. Yes, sir. I wasn't in your direct chain of command, but I was there for the incident with Colonel Hayes, when he was still a captain. The memory of that day rushed back with painful clarity. Hayes had been a company commander under Thornton's battalion. During an operation to clear insurgents from a section of Ramadi, Hayes had disobeyed a direct order to hold position, instead advancing his company into an area not yet cleared by EOD. The result had been catastrophic. An IED had destroyed one of Hayes's tanks, killing 2 crewmen and injuring 3 others. I see, Thornton said carefully. And now you find yourself serving under me against Hayes in this competition. Washington nodded. Yes, sir, I thought you should know. It might be relevant. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sergeant. Does it present a problem for you? Washington hesitated, then straightened. No, sir, just thought you should be aware. As Washington left, Thornton remained alone in the briefing room, his thoughts troubled. The competition had just become more complicated. Not only was he facing it off against Hayes, but he now had a crew member with personal connections to their shared history. He wondered what other surprises awaited him at Fort Knox. His phone buzzed with a message from Montgomery. Hayes arrived at Benning today with full media contingent, already making noise about the future of warfare. Keep me posted on your progress. Thornton pocketed the phone without responding. The stakes kept getting higher, but he hadn't backed down from a challenge in 37 years of service, and he wasn't about to start now. Fort Knox Training Grounds, March 19, 2025, 0500 hours. Dawn was still an hour away when Thornton arrived at the physical training field. The air was crisp with early spring chill, dew coating the grass. He wore standard PT uniform, his age evident only in the silver of his hair, not in his physical bearing. Despite the knee injury that occasionally troubled him and the other scars earned over decades of service, he maintained the fitness level of a man 20 years younger. The Honor Guard platoon was already assembled, standing in formation under the watchful eye of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. As Thornton approached, Rodriguez called them to attention. Honor Guard platoon, attention! 16 soldiers snapped to attention. Thornton waved them to ease. Good morning, platoon. Good morning, sir, they responded in unison. Thornton surveyed the group. They looked fit enough, as he would expect from a demonstration unit, but fitness for parades and fitness for combat were different things entirely. Today we begin the process of transforming from a ceremonial unit into a combat-ready tank platoon, he announced, his voice carrying across the field. The Sullivan Cup isn't just about precision driving or accurate gunnery. It's about endurance, mental toughness, and crew cohesion. We'll start building those qualities right now. For the next hour, Thornton led them through a grueling PT session that included not just standard calisthenics, but tank-specific exercises. Ammunition loading drills with weighted dummy rounds, evacuation procedures, and stress shooting positions. Throughout, he observed each soldier, noting strengths and weaknesses. Lieutenant Carter performed admirably, keeping pace with the strongest male soldiers. Sergeant Washington was powerfully built and moved with the efficiency of a veteran, though Thornton noticed he seemed to favor his right side slightly. Sergeant Wilson, despite his lean frame, displayed remarkable stamina and strength. As the sun broke over the horizon, Thornton finally called a halt. The platoon was breathing hard, sweat soaking their uniforms despite the cool morning air. Hit the showers, breakfast, then meet at Training Bay 3 at 0700. We start crew drills. As they dispersed, Thornton approached Washington. Sergeant, a moment. Washington stopped, coming to parade rest. Sir, I noticed you favoring your right side during some of the exercises. Any injury I should be aware of? Washington's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Old shrapnel wound, sir. It acts up sometimes, but it won't affect my performance. Thornton studied him for a moment. From Ramadi? Yes, sir, from the incident we discussed. So Washington had been more directly involved than he'd initially let on. I need to know if it's going to be a problem, Sergeant. Not just physically, but mentally. Hayes will be there. It could bring back memories. Washington met his gaze steadily. I can handle it, sir. Thornton nodded, choosing to accept the answer for now. See the medic if it gives you trouble. I need you at 100%. After a quick breakfast in the mess hall, where Thornton sat with Rodriguez to discuss the platoon's previous training regimen, they moved to Training Bay 3. The massive hangar housed 4 M1A2 Abrams tanks, the workhorses of the U.S. Army's armor divisions. They weren't the latest models, as Montgomery had warned, but they were well maintained. The platoon assembled in front of the tanks, now dressed in their tanker uniforms. Thornton stood before them, hands clasped behind his back. The M1 Abrams has been the backbone of American armor since 1980. In those 45 years, it has proven itself in combat from Kuwait to Iraq to Afghanistan. It remains the finest main battle tank ever built. He turned to the nearest tank, running his hand along the massive steel hull. But a tank is only as good as its crew. 4 soldiers working in perfect harmony inside 60 tons of steel. That harmony doesn't happen by accident. It requires hundreds of hours of training until each action becomes instinctive. Thornton turned back to the platoon. We'll start with basics, loading drills, target acquisition, driver orientation. Then we'll move to full crew exercises. By the end of today, I want to see where each of you stands. By the end of the week, I want to see improvement. By the end of 8 weeks, I want the finest tank crews in the United States Army. Clear? Yes, sir, the response was enthusiastic. Lieutenant Carter, Sergeant Washington, Sergeant Wilson, you're with me on Tank 1. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, take your crew to Tank 2. The rest of you divide between Tanks 3 and 4 under Sergeants Miller and Jackson. Begin with basic position drills, then crew communication exercises. As the platoon dispersed to their assigned tanks, Thornton approached Tank 1, a M1A2 SCPV-2 Abrams, with the name Iron Thunder stenciled on its main gun. The name brought a faint smile to his lips. It was appropriate. He climbed up onto the tank's hull, then down into the commander's hatch. The familiar confines of the tank's interior welcomed him like an old friend. Despite advances in technology, the basic layout had changed little over the decades. It was still cramped, still hot, still the most lethal ground combat system ever devised. Carter took her position at the gunner's station, Washington at the loader's position, and Wilson at the driver's compartment in the hull. "Com check," Thornton said into his headset. "Gunner up," Carter responded. "Loader up," Washington confirmed. "Driver up," Wilson reported. Thornton nodded, satisfied. "Let's start with basic movement drills. Driver, start engine." Wilson engaged the Abrams turbine engine, which roared to life with its distinctive high-pitched whine. The entire tank vibrated with contained power. "Driver, forward 5 meters, then stop." Wilson complied smoothly, easing the massive vehicle forward with surprising gentleness before bringing it to a perfect stop. His touch on the controls was evident. "Now reverse, same distance." Again, Wilson executed the maneuver flawlessly. "Good. Now gunner, traverse turret to 3 o'clock, then 9 o'clock, full speed." Carter manipulated the controls, and the turret rotated rapidly to the right, then swung back all the way to the left. Her movements were precise but slightly slower than Thornton expected. Loader loading drill, load heat. Washington opened the ammunition door, selected a dummy high-explosive anti-tank round, and loaded it into the breech with practiced movements. His strength was evident in how easily he handled the heavy round, but Thornton noticed a slight hesitation in his sequence. They continued through basic drills for the next hour, Thornton observing and occasionally correcting technique. Despite being the honor guard crew, it was clear they had room for improvement. Carter's gunnery skills were solid, but lacked the intuitive flow of a combat-experienced gunner. Washington's loading technique was strong, but occasionally marred by that same hesitation Thornton had noticed earlier. Wilson's driving was exceptional, perhaps the best Thornton had seen in years. After the basic drills, Thornton had them practice more complex maneuvers: fire on the move, rapid target acquisition, emergency procedures. By noon, he had a clear picture of their capabilities. He called a halt and had the platoon assemble in front of the tanks again. "You're a demonstration unit, and it shows," he said bluntly. "Your fundamentals are solid, but you lack the edge that comes from knowing your life depends on your performance. That changes today. From now on, we train as if lives are at stake, because in real combat, they would be." He paced before them, his voice intense. The Sullivan Cup isn't just about pretty maneuvers or hitting stationary targets. It's about proving that tanks and tank crews are still relevant on the modern battlefield. We're not just competing against Fort Benning, we're fighting for the future of armor itself. He saw the weight of his words register on their faces. Good. They needed to understand the stakes. This afternoon, we moved to the simulators for gunnery practice. Then tomorrow, we hit the field for navigation and tactical exercises. Questions? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, will we be conducting any joint exercises with infantry or aviation assets? The tactical portion of the Cup often includes combined arms scenarios." "Good question, Sergeant. Yes, I've arranged for joint exercises beginning next week. We'll work with elements from the infantry school and with aviation assets from Campbell." Any other questions? When there were none, Thornton dismissed them for lunch, but asked his primary crew to stay behind. Once they were alone, he addressed them directly. "I selected each of you for specific reasons. Lieutenant Carter, your gunnery scores are top-notch. Sergeant Washington, your experience is invaluable. Sergeant Wilson, your technical skills are exceptional." He paused, looking each in the eye. "But we need to become more than the sum of our parts. We need to become a crew. That means complete trust in one another and in me." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Always, Sergeant." "With respect, Colonel, the competition has changed a lot in recent years. It's become more about systems integration and technical proficiency than old-school tank tactics. Colonel Hayes knows this. His team will be training specifically for the Cup scenarios." Thornton nodded, having expected this objection. "You're not wrong, Sergeant. The competition has evolved, but the fundamentals of tank warfare haven't. Speed, accuracy, aggression, and crew cohesion still win the day, regardless of technology." He turned to Washington. "Sergeant, I noticed a hesitation in your loading sequence. Care to explain?" Washington stiffened slightly. "Just getting used to the layout again, sir. It's been a while since I served in a tank crew." Thornton sensed there was more to it, but didn't press. "Work on it. We need your loads to be automatic, instantaneous." To Carter, he said, "Lieutenant, your gunnery is precise but mechanical. You need to develop a more intuitive feel for the weapon system. In combat, you don't always have time for perfect sight alignment." "Understood, sir," she replied crisply. "I'll work on it." Thornton nodded, satisfied with their responses for now. "We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I believe we can win this thing, not just for ourselves, but for every tanker who came before us and everyone who will come after." As they headed for the mess hall, Thornton remained by the tank, running his hand along the cold steel of the hull. He'd meant what he said about fighting for the future of armor, but he hadn't mentioned his personal stake in the competition. Hayes represented everything Thornton had fought against throughout his career: the prioritization of technology over training, systems over soldiers, theory over proven tactics. This wasn't just about a trophy, it was about proving that the soul of Armor Corps still mattered. Fort Knox Simulation Center, March 19, 2025, 1300 hours. The Advanced Gunnery Training System, AGTS facilities at Fort Knox, house some of the most sophisticated tank simulators in the world. Each simulator replicated the interior of an M1 Abrams down to the smallest detail, allowing crews to practice gunnery and tactical scenarios without the expense of live ammunition or fuel. Thornton's platoon filed into the briefing room adjacent to the simulator bays. On the main screen was a satellite image of a training range with various terrain features and target positions marked. "This afternoon, we'll be running Gunnery Table 6 scenarios," Thornton announced. "This will give me a baseline assessment of your current capabilities." He nodded to a civilian technician who brought up a new display showing performance metrics from previous runs. "These are the scores from the Fort Benning team's last recorded simulator session. As you can see, they're impressive. Our job is to exceed them." The scores were indeed formidable, showing engagement times well below Army standards and hit percentages in the high 90s. Lieutenant Carter studied the numbers with a frown. "Sir, these engagement times are almost impossibly fast. How are they achieving that?" "Colonel Hayes has been implementing what he calls predictive targeting," Thornton explained. "It's a system that anticipates target movements and begins the engagement process before the gunner has fully acquired the target. Effective in certain scenarios, but potentially dangerous in others." "Sounds like he's letting the computer do the thinking," Washington remarked with evident disdain. "That's precisely his philosophy," Thornton agreed. "He believes the future of tank warfare lies in automation and artificial intelligence. Minimal human input, maximum system control." "Isn't that more efficient?" Wilson asked. "If the computer can react faster than a human, shouldn't we let it?" Thornton turned to the young sergeant. "Computers don't have judgment, Sergeant. They can't distinguish between a tank and a school bus at extreme ranges. They can't assess if a target is a priority based on battlefield conditions. They can't make the moral and ethical decisions that combat requires." He addressed the entire platoon again. "Hayes believes tanks should be unmanned vehicles controlled remotely or even autonomous. I believe that removes the most critical component of the system, the human element. The Sullivan Cup will help determine which philosophy prevails." With that sobering thought, Thornton divided them into their crews and sent them to the simulators. He joined his primary crew in Simulator 1, taking the commander's position while Carter, Washington, and Wilson took their respective stations. "We'll run the standard Table 6 sequence," he instructed. 10 engagements, mixed stationary and moving targets, various ranges. I want to see how we perform as a baseline." The simulator hummed to life, the screen showing a realistic desert environment. Thornton felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as the scenario began. Despite knowing it was just a simulation, his body responded as if he were back in a real tank, his senses sharpening, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. "Driver, move to position Alpha," he ordered. "Gunner, scan for targets sector 1 through 3. Wilson navigated the simulated tank smoothly to the first firing position, while Carter traversed the turret, scanning the designated sectors. "Target identified, tank, sector 2, 1800 meters, Carter reported. "Gunner, Sabot, tank, fire when ready," Thornton ordered. "Identified," Carter confirmed. "On the way." The simulator mimicked the recoil of the main gun firing. On the screen, the target was obliterated by a direct hit. "Target destroyed," Carter reported. "Loader, Sabot," Thornton called. Washington went through the loading procedure, but again Thornton noticed that slight hesitation. "Up," Washington called once the round was loaded. They continued through the engagements, destroying target after target. Their performance was good by regular Army standards, but still not at the level of the Benning team's scores. After completing the table, they exited the simulator to review their results. The other crews joined them, and the technician displayed all 4 crews' scores on the main screen. "Not bad for a first run," Thornton acknowledged, "but not good enough. Our average engagement time is 6.4 seconds. Benning's is 4.2. Our hit percentage is 92%, theirs is 98%. We have work to do." He turned to Washington. "Sergeant, your loading times are consistently half a second slower than standard. What's the issue?" Washington's jaw tightened. "No issue, sir. I'll improve." Thornton held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "See that you do. In a real engagement, half a second is the difference between hitting the target and getting hit." To Wilson, he said, "Your driving is excellent, Sergeant. Best I've seen in years. But you're anticipating my commands rather than executing them as given. That works when you guess right, but it could be catastrophic if you guess wrong." Wilson nodded, accepting the criticism. "Lieutenant Carter," Thornton continued, "your target acquisition is precise but too methodical. You're following the book perfectly, but in combat, perfect is the enemy of good enough. You need to develop a more instinctive approach." "Yes, sir," Carter acknowledged. Permission to run additional simulator time after hours? Granted, in fact, I encourage all of you to put in extra time. The simulators will be available until 2,200 hours daily. Thornton looked at the entire platoon. We have 8 weeks to close the gap between where we are and where we need to be. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. As they filed out to take a short break before their next session, Thornton remained behind with the simulator technician, a retired Master Sergeant named Griggs, who had served in Desert Storm. "What do you think, Master Sergeant?" Thornton asked once they were alone. "Honestly." Griggs scratched his gray beard. "They're good, Colonel. Better than most units I see come through here. But Benning's crew is something else. Hayes has them wired into those tanks like they're extensions of the machine. It's impressive, but what? But it's not tanking the way you and I learned it," Griggs said. "They rely so heavily on the advanced systems that I wonder what would happen if those systems failed. In the old days, we could still fight effectively if the electronics went down. I'm not sure these new crews could." Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I intend to find out. Can you modify the simulator scenarios to include system failures? Sights going down, autoloader malfunctions, that sort of thing." Griggs grinned. "Can do, Colonel. Want to throw some curveballs at them?" "Not just curveballs, Master Sergeant. I want to change the game entirely. Hayes is training his people to be system operators. I want mine to be tankers." As Thornton left the simulator facility that evening, after hours of drilling his crews through increasingly complex scenarios, he felt a mix of concern and determination. The gap between their performance and Benning's was significant, but not insurmountable. With the right training approach, they could close it. His phone buzzed with another message from Montgomery. "Hayes gave interview to Army Times today. Called tanks dinosaurs waiting for the meteor. Keep pushing your people." Thornton pocketed the phone with a grim smile. If Hayes wanted to fight this battle in the media, that was his choice. Thornton would fight it where it mattered, on the training grounds and in the crucible of competition. Tomorrow they would move to the field, where he could begin shaping them into the kind of crew that could win not just a competition but a war. A crew that understood that tanks weren't just weapon systems, but the physical embodiment of shock, firepower, and protected mobility that had defined ground combat since their inception. A crew worthy of the name Iron Thunder. Fort Knox Training Area. March 20th, 2025, 0700 hours. The morning broke clear and cool over the sprawling training grounds of Fort Knox. 4 M1A2 Abrams tanks sat in a line at the edge of a vast open field, their engines idling with the distinctive turbine whine that had become synonymous with American armor. Thornton stood atop the lead tank, surveying the terrain before them. Unlike the desert landscapes where he had earned his reputation, the Kentucky countryside offered a mix of open fields, wooded areas, and rolling hills. It was perfect for the training he had in mind. The crews were assembled in front of their vehicles, waiting for instructions. Thornton jumped down from the tank and addressed them. "Today we move beyond the basics. Today we begin thinking and operating as a platoon. 4 tanks, 16 men, one purpose, domination of the battlefield." He unfolded a map and laid it on the hood of a nearby Humvee. "We'll be conducting a tactical movement exercise across these 10 kilometers of terrain. Along the way, you'll encounter simulated enemy positions, obstacles, and challenging terrain features. Your objective is to reach the designated assembly area while maintaining platoon integrity and security." He pointed to specific locations on the map. "I've arranged for OP4 elements from the infantry school to provide opposition. They'll be equipped with laser designators simulating anti-tank weapons. If you're hit, your tank's computer will register the hit and simulate the appropriate damage." Thornton looked up at his crews. "This isn't just about driving from point A to point B. It's about tactical thinking, terrain analysis, and crew coordination. It's about developing the instincts that keep you alive in combat." He assigned each tank commander a specific role within the platoon formation, with his own tank serving as the platoon leader and Rodriguez's as the platoon sergeant. "Mount up. We move in 5 minutes. Lieutenant Carter, a word." As the others moved to their tanks, Carter approached Thornton. "Sir, you'll be acting as my executive officer today. I want you observing and learning. Pay particular attention to how the platoon maintains formation during movement and how we react to contact." "Yes, sir. Any specific aspects you want me to focus on?" Thornton considered for a moment. "Watch how I position the platoon relative to terrain features. Terrain is a tanker's best friend or worst enemy. Understanding how to use it effectively is a skill that can't be taught in a classroom. Carter nodded, her expression serious. Understood, sir. As they climbed aboard Iron Thunder, Thornton felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Despite his age and the years behind a desk, this was where he belonged. Inside 60 tons of American steel, leading men and women in the profession of arms. Driver, start movement, standard column formation, 10-meter intervals. The four tanks moved out, their massive treads churning the earth beneath them. Thornton stood in the commander's hatch, head and shoulders exposed above the turret, scanning the terrain ahead. The weight of the CVC helmet was familiar, the slight resistance of the hatch against his back a reminder of countless similar movements over the decades. They proceeded cautiously across the first open field, then entered a wooded area where the tanks had to navigate between trees, testing the driver's precision. Wilson handled the challenge with ease, threading the massive vehicle through gaps that seemed barely wide enough with millimeter precision. You've got a natural touch, Sergeant, Thornton commented. Grew up driving farm equipment in Iowa, sir, Wilson replied. Tractors, combines, you name it. This is just a bigger, faster tracker with a really big gun. Thornton smiled at the comparison. There was some truth to it. Many of America's best tankers came from rural backgrounds, where handling heavy machinery was second nature. They emerged from the woods into another clearing, where the terrain sloped upward toward a ridgeline. All tanks, this is Ghost 6, Thornton radioed, using his old call sign from Desert Storm. Terrain analysis, what do you see ahead? Ghost 6, this is Ghost 2, Rodriguez responded. Ridgeline at 12 o'clock. Potentially good observation post, but also makes us silhouetted if we crest it. Ghost 6, Ghost 3, drainage ditch at 11 o'clock provides covered approach to the ridgeline's western edge. Ghost 6, Ghost 4, small copse of trees on the eastern flank could conceal enemy ATGM position. Thornton nodded, pleased with their observations. Good. Ghost 2, take your tank up the drainage ditch. Ghost 3, provide overwatch from current position. Ghost 4, investigate that tree line. My tank will hold here until the flanks are secure. The platoon executed his orders smoothly. Rodriguez's tank moved toward the drainage ditch while the other tanks took up their assigned positions. Suddenly, the radio crackled. Contact! ATGM team in the trees, taking fire. Ghost 4 had indeed found enemy forces. The simulation computer indicated they had been hit by a missile, but not destroyed. Ghost 4, status? Thornton demanded. Mobility hit, sir. Simulation says our right track is damaged. Thornton made a quick decision. Ghost 3, suppress that ATGM position. Ghost 2, continue your advance and flank them from the west. My tank will provide covering fire for Ghost 4's crew to conduct simulated repairs. The platoon responded instantly. Ghost 3 opened fire with its coaxial machine gun, while Ghost 2 accelerated up the drainage ditch. Thornton's tank moved forward, positioning itself between Ghost 4 and the enemy position. Gunner, target the tree line, Sector 4, coax, suppressive fire. Carter traversed the turret and began firing the simulated coaxial machine gun at the enemy position. Meanwhile, Ghost 4's crew worked through the procedures for a track repair, timing themselves as if under actual fire. Within minutes, Ghost 2 had flanked the enemy position, and the OPFOR teams signaled they were neutralized. Ghost 4 reported their simulated repairs complete. All tanks, continue movement. Modified wedge formation. Ghost 4 on the left flank, Ghost 3 on right, Ghost 2 center left, my tank center right. Maintain visual contact at all times. The exercise continued for hours, with Thornton deliberately leading them through the most challenging terrain on the range. They encountered more OPFOR elements, had to cross a water obstacle, and navigate a section of the range designated as contaminated with chemical agents, requiring them to operate under simulated MOP Level 4 conditions. By mid-afternoon, when they finally reached the designated assembly area, all four crews were exhausted but exhilarated. They had completed the exercise successfully, though not without mistakes. 2 tanks had taken simulated hits that would have been catastrophic in actual combat, and there had been communication breakdowns during critical moments. Thornton gathered the platoon for an after-action review. Overall, not bad for a first run, he began, but in real combat, not bad gets you killed. Ghost 4, you exposed your flank to that ATGM team. Waima. The tank commander, a young sergeant named Miller Straighton, failed to conduct proper terrain analysis, sir. I assumed the trees were too thin to conceal a weapon system. Never assume, Sergeant. In combat, assumptions are paid for in blood. Thornton turned to Rodriguez. Ghost 2, your reaction to the ambush was prompt and effective. Good use of the drainage ditch for cover and movement. He addressed the entire platoon. The key lessons from today. First, terrain analysis is not optional. You must constantly read the ground, understanding how it can help you and how it can kill you. Second, platoon integrity is essential. There were moments today when tanks lost visual contact with each other, creating gaps the enemy could exploit. Third, crew communication must be concise, clear, and constant. He paused, letting the lessons sink in. We'll run this exercise again tomorrow, with variations. I expect to see improvement across all metrics. As the platoon dispersed to conduct maintenance on their vehicles, Thornton motioned for his primary crew to join him. Impressions, he asked? Carter spoke first. The platoon has good individual skills, sir, but we're not operating as a cohesive unit yet. Communication breaks down under pressure. Agreed, Thornton nodded. Washington? The loader seemed thoughtful. Reminds me of my early days in Iraq, sir, before we learned the hard lessons. These kids know the procedures, but they don't understand the why behind them. Precisely, and you, Wilson? The young driver shrugged. Honestly, sir, I think we're overcomplicating things. In the simulator, we let the systems do their job. Out here, we're trying to outthink machines that are designed to think faster than us. Thornton raised an eyebrow. An interesting perspective, Sergeant, and exactly the kind of thinking Hayes promotes. Let me ask you this. What happens when the enemy jams your sensors, or when an EMP fries your electronics, or when a simple mechanical failure renders your advanced systems inoperable? Wilson didn't have a ready answer. The fundamentals we're practicing aren't about ignoring technology, Thornton continued. They're about ensuring we can still fight effectively when technology fails us. Because in combat, it will, I guarantee it. He looked at each of them in turn. Tomorrow we step it up. Night operations, limited visibility, degraded communications. I want to see how you perform when everything goes wrong. As they moved towards their tank to begin maintenance procedures, Thornton noticed Washington lingering again. The sergeant seemed troubled. Something on your mind, Sergeant? Washington hesitated, then spoke quietly. Sir, I think you should know. I wasn't just at Ramadi during the incident with Hayes. I was in the tank that got hit. Thornton felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. You were in Alpha 31? Yes, sir. I was the loader. The blast killed my TC and gunner. Driver lost his legs. I got lucky. Just some shrapnel in my side and a concussion. The revelation cast Washington's earlier hesitation in a new light. He wasn't struggling with the loading procedure. He was wrestling with memories. Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? Thornton asked, keeping his voice level. Didn't want special treatment, sir, and didn't want you to think I couldn't perform. Thornton considered this. Does it affect your performance? Washington met his gaze steadily. Sometimes I hesitate when I close the breach, sir. Just a flash of memory. I'm working on it. Have you spoken to anyone about this? Professionally, I mean. The counselor for a while after it happened. Thought I was past it until I heard we'd be going up against Hayes in this competition. Thornton nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, Sergeant, and I understand more than you might think. We all carry our ghosts from combat. He placed a hand on Washington's shoulder. Work with me on this. We'll get through it together. The best therapy for bad memories is creating better ones to replace them. Washington nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. Thank you, sir. As Washington walked away, Thornton remained alone beside the tank, processing this new information. The competition had just become even more personal, not just for him, but for Washington as well. Hayes's recklessness had cost the lives of Washington's crewmates, men who had been under Thornton's overall command. The weight of that responsibility still sat heavily on Thornton's shoulders, even after 20 years. He had recommended Hayes for court-martial after the incident, but political connections had seen the captain merely reassigned. And now Hayes was a colonel, commanding one of the Army's premier tank units and advocating for a future where soldiers like Washington would be replaced by algorithms and automation. Thornton placed his hand on the cold steel of the tank's hull, feeling its solidity, its permanence. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, he would ensure that Hayes did not succeed in his mission to render obsolete the branch that had defined Thornton's life, not just for his own sake, but for Washington's, and for every tanker who had ever sealed the hatch and moved forward into danger. The battle for the soul of the Armor Corps had begun. Darkness enveloped the Kentucky hills, broken only by a sliver of moonlight filtering through scattered clouds. The air carried the first hints of spring, but at this hour the chill still bit through layers of uniform and body armor. Colonel Jack Thornton stood motionless in the shadows, watching the terrain through night vision goggles as his platoon prepared for the evening's exercise. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival at Fort Knox. 2 weeks of grueling training, 14-hour days that tested not just skill, but resolve. The platoon had improved markedly, but still fell short of where they needed to be. Tonight would push them further. "All elements in position, sir," Lieutenant Carter reported, her voice low despite the privacy of their location. Thornton nodded. "Initiate Phase 1. Carter spoke quietly into her radio, and moments later the stillness of the night was broken by the distant rumble of tank engines starting up. One by one, 4 points of light appeared on Thornton's tactical display, showing the positions of his tanks as they began their advance through the valley below. Tonight's exercise was designed to simulate real combat conditions: limited visibility, degraded communications, and an opposing force equipped with the latest anti-tank systems. The platoon's mission was to secure a series of objectives while maintaining operational security. No headlights, minimum radio communication, and constant threat awareness. "They're approaching the first NAI," Carter observed, referring to the named area of interest where OPFOR elements were likely positioned. Thornton remained silent, watching. This was a test of Washington's leadership as much as the platoon's performance. The sergeant had taken command of Iron Thunder for the exercise, with Wilson and 2 other crew members. Carter was observing with Thornton, while Rodriguez commanded the second tank, and the remaining vehicles were led by Sergeants Miller and Jackson. The lead tank, Iron Thunder, slowed as it approached a tree line, maintaining proper tactical movement. Thornton nodded approvingly. Washington was showing good judgment, recognizing the danger of the choke point ahead. Then it happened. A flash of light erupted from the tree line, followed by the simulated launch signature of an anti-tank guided missile. Iron Thunder's systems registered a hit on its frontal armor. "Mobility kill on Thunder," the OPFOR controller's voice announced over the command net. "Track damaged, vehicle immobilized." Washington's tank ground to a halt, now a stationary target. Thornton watched intently, waiting to see how the sergeant would react to the crisis. "Thunder to all elements. Contact front. Taking fire from tree line grid 123456. Washington's voice came through clearly. "Platoon deploy, bounding overwatch." The remaining tanks responded quickly, moving into supporting positions while maintaining their dispersion. Rodriguez's tank laid down suppressive fire on the tree line, enabling Miller's crew to maneuver to a flanking position. "Good," Thornton murmured. "They're adapting." The platoon executed a textbook response to the ambush, neutralizing the OPFOR position within minutes and establishing security around Washington's disabled tank. A recovery team moved in to simulate track repair, while the rest of the unit maintained overwatch. But Thornton noticed something concerning. Through his enhanced optics, he could see Washington had emerged from the tank commander's hatch, but remained frozen, staring at the tree line where the simulated missile had originated. Even from this distance, Thornton recognized the 1,000-yard stare of a man caught in the grip of memory. "Lieutenant, take over observation. I need to check something." Carter nodded, accepting the high-powered binoculars. Thornton made his way down the hill toward Iron Thunder, moving quietly through the underbrush with the practiced ease of a man who had spent decades in the field. He approached the tank from the rear, staying in the blind spot until he was close enough to call up to Washington without alerting the rest of the crew. "Sergeant," he said quietly. Washington startled, then looked down to see Thornton standing beside the tank. He immediately started to climb down. "Stay where you are," Thornton ordered. "Just listen." Washington froze, still half exposed in the hatch. "What happened just now?" Thornton asked. The sergeant's face was difficult to read in the darkness, but his voice revealed his struggle. "Flashback, sir. The simulation missile. It was too real. For a second, I was back in Ramadi." Thornton nodded, having suspected as much. "It happens to the best of us, Sergeant. No shame in it, but we need to address it." "I'll get it under control, sir. Won't happen again." "That's not how PTSD works, and we both know it," Thornton said, his tone firm, but not unkind. "After the exercise, we talk. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Washington's voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "Can you continue the mission?" Washington squared his shoulders. "Absolutely, sir." "Then carry on. Your platoon is performing well so far. Keep it that way." As Washington descended back into the tank, Thornton returned to his observation post. Carter glanced at him questioningly but said nothing. The exercise continued for another 3 hours, with the platoon completing its objectives despite further simulated casualties and equipment failures. By the time they returned to the assembly area at 0500, exhaustion was evident on every face. Thornton gathered them for a brief after-action review, highlighting both successes and failures, before dismissing everyone except his primary crew. Once the others had departed, he led Carter, Washington, and Wilson to a small classroom building nearby. Inside, he switched on a single lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. The air smelled of old coffee and chalk dust. He gestured for them to sit, taking a seat himself on the edge of a desk. "What I'm about to share stays in this room," he began, his voice grave. "It's not for official records or casual conversation. Understood?" All three nodded, suddenly alert despite their fatigue. "Sergeant Washington experienced a flashback during tonight's exercise," Thornton said directly. "It's related to his experience in Ramadi in 2005. I believe it's important that all of you understand what happened there, both for the team's cohesion and for our preparation to face Hayes at the Sullivan Cup." Washington tensed but didn't object. Thornton looked to him. "Would you prefer to tell it, Sergeant?" Washington shook his head. "You were there, sir. You saw the bigger picture." Thornton nodded and took a deep breath. "In March 2005, I commanded 3rd Battalion, 67th Armor Regiment in Ramadi, Iraq. Captain Robert Hayes commanded Alpha Company. We were conducting a clearing operation in the eastern sector of the city, an area known for IED attacks and insurgent activity." He paused, the memories as fresh as if they had happened yesterday. Hayes was ambitious, always looking to make his mark. He believed in technology over training, systems over soldiers. His company had received some of the first upgraded thermal sights and communication systems, and he was convinced they gave him a tactical advantage that negated the need for standard operating procedures. Thornton's jaw tightened. "I issued specific orders that all units were to advance only after EOD teams had cleared the routes." Hayes disagreed with that assessment. He believed his tank's ground-penetrating radar could identify IEDs more efficiently than the EOD teams. "So he jumped the line," Wilson said, understanding dawning. "He disobeyed a direct order," Thornton confirmed. "Moved his lead platoon forward into an area not yet cleared. They made it 400 meters before hitting a daisy-chain series of IEDs. The lead tank, Alpha 31, took the brunt of the explosion." Washington's face had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. 5 155mm artillery shells buried under the road. Pressure plate trigger. We never saw it coming. "The TC and gunner were killed instantly," Thornton continued quietly. "The driver lost both legs. Sergeant Washington here was thrown clear of the turret but sustained significant injuries." Carter looked at Washington with new understanding. "The hesitation during loading drills?" Washington nodded almost imperceptibly. "The breech closing sounds like the IED detonating." Wilson shook his head in disbelief. "And Hayes, what happened to him?" Thornton's expression darkened. "I recommended him for court-martial. Disobeying a direct order in a combat zone, resulting in casualties. It should have ended his career. But Hayes had connections. His father was a 3-star at the Pentagon. The incident was classified as a tactical misjudgment rather than insubordination. He received a letter of reprimand that somehow never made it into his permanent file, and he was transferred to another unit. And now he's a colonel," Wilson said, disgust evident in his voice. "A colonel who still believes technology trumps training and human judgment," Thornton added. "That's what makes him dangerous, not just to our chances in the Sullivan Cup, but to the future of the armor branch itself." He looked at Washington. "I failed those men that day, Sergeant. Failed to ensure Hayes followed orders. Failed to protect your crew." Washington straightened. "With respect, sir, you didn't fail. Hayes failed. The system that protected him failed. You did everything by the book." Thornton appreciated the sentiment, but the weight of command responsibility wasn't so easily displaced. "The point of sharing this isn't to assign blame. It's to ensure you all understand what we're really fighting for in this competition. It's not just about a trophy, it's about the soul of the Armor Corps, the belief that soldiers matter more than systems. That judgment and experience can never be fully replaced by algorithms and automation." He stood, indicating the conversation was nearing its end. "Sergeant Washington, I want you working with the post-psychologist on techniques to manage the flashbacks. This isn't optional, and it's not punitive. It's necessary for both your well-being and the team's performance." Washington nodded. "Already scheduled an appointment for tomorrow, sir." "Good man," Thornton said, genuinely impressed by the sergeant's initiative. Lieutenant Carter, I want you to review all the footage from tonight's exercise. Identify every instance where our platoon relied on technology when fundamental tactics would have served better. Yes, sir, Carter acknowledged. Sergeant Wilson, you've been our biggest technology advocate. I want you to simulate complete system failure in tomorrow's exercise. No thermal imaging, no laser rangefinder, no ballistic computer. Just basic optics and manual controls. See how it affects your performance. Wilson looked skeptical but nodded. Will do, sir. Get some rest, Thornton concluded. We're back at it at 1300. As they filed out, Wilson lingered behind. Once they were alone, the young sergeant spoke hesitantly. Sir, about Washington, should we be concerned? I mean, if he freezes up during the competition. He won't, Thornton said with certainty. Washington is one of the strongest soldiers I've ever served with. Now that it's in the open, now that he's getting help, he'll be fine. Wilson seemed unconvinced. If you say so, sir, but with all due respect, Hayes will exploit any weakness. He's got too much riding on this. Thornton fixed the young sergeant with a penetrating stare. You seem to know a lot about how Hayes operates, Sergeant. Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Just based on what you've told us, sir. Is that all? Thornton pressed. After a moment of hesitation, Wilson confessed. He reached out to me, sir. When the team assignments were announced, sent me an email suggesting I might be better suited to his approach at Benning. Thornton's eyebrows rose. He tried to poach you from my team? Yes, sir, I declined, of course. Why didn't you report this? Wilson looked genuinely confused. Didn't think it was that unusual. Happens in sports all the time. The Army isn't sports, Sergeant. It's a profession with a chain of command and proper protocols. Hayes overstepped by approaching you directly. Sorry, sir. Didn't realize it was that serious. Thornton studied the young sergeant, reconsidering some of his assumptions. Wilson wasn't arrogant so much as innocent of the deeper currents of military politics. His technical brilliance had perhaps insulated him from the harsher realities of Army life. No harm done, Thornton said finally. But if he contacts you again, I want to know immediately. Understood? Crystal clear, sir. As Wilson departed, Thornton remained alone in the quiet classroom, processing this new information. Hayes was playing a deeper game than he had realized, already working to undermine Thornton's team from within. It was a troubling development, but also revealing. If Hayes felt the need for such tactics, perhaps he wasn't as confident in his technological advantage as he appeared. Thornton's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Montgomery. Hayes just gave congressional testimony advocating for 60% reduction in heavy armor funding. Says unmanned systems are the future. Committee seems receptive. We need that win at Sullivan, Jack. The stakes continued to rise. What had begun as a competition was rapidly evolving into a referendum on the future of American armored warfare itself. And Thornton's small team stood at the center of the storm. Fort Knox Simulation Center, April 10, 2025, 1400 hours. System failure! System failure! The automated alert blared through the simulator speakers as red warning lights flashed across the displays. Fire control system offline, autoloader malfunctioning, thermal imaging disabled. Inside the cramped confines of the simulated tank, Lieutenant Carter remained focused despite the cacophony of alarms. Switching to manual controls, gunner's auxiliary site operational. Target tank, 12 o'clock. Range estimate 1,000 meters, Thornton called out, peering through the commander's override sight. Identified, Carter confirmed, making rapid adjustments to the manual elevation and azimuth controls. Calculating. Up, Washington announced from the loader's position, having manually loaded a simulated round into the breech. Fire when ready, Thornton ordered. Carter squeezed the trigger, and the simulator mimicked the recoil of the main gun firing. Through their sights, they watched as the target was struck, erupting in simulated flames. Target destroyed, Carter reported, adjusting for next target. The exercise continued for another 20 minutes, with the crew engaging multiple targets under increasingly difficult conditions. System failures, simulated NBC environment, crew casualties requiring position cross-training. By the time the simulator powered down, all four were drenched in sweat despite the air conditioning. Time, announced Master Sergeant Griggs from the control station. Total of 12 targets engaged, 11 destroyed, average engagement time 8.3 seconds. Thornton nodded, satisfied with their progress. 3 weeks of intensive training had transformed them from individuals with strong skills into a cohesive crew. Washington's loading times had improved dramatically since beginning therapy, and his occasional hesitations had all but disappeared. Carter had developed a more intuitive approach to gunnery, relying less on the fire control computer and more on her own judgment. Wilson had embraced the challenge of operating with degraded systems, finding creative solutions to technical problems. Not bad, Thornton acknowledged as they exited the simulator, especially considering we were operating without most of our advanced systems. That's the point, isn't it, sir? Wilson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. To prove we can still function even when the technology fails. Exactly, Sergeant. In real combat, Murphy's Law rules supreme. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, usually at the worst possible moment. The difference between a good crew and a great one is how they perform when everything goes to hell. They moved to a debriefing room where Griggs displayed their performance metrics on a large screen. You've cut your engagement time nearly in half since we started, Griggs observed, and your hit percentage under degraded conditions is now consistently above 90%. That's impressive progress. How do we compare to Benning's team? Carter asked. Griggs exchanged a glance with Thornton before responding. Based on the latest data we have, they're still faster on standard engagements. Their average time is 4.1 seconds compared to your 6.5. But under degraded conditions, they drop to 10.2 seconds while you're maintaining 8.3. So they're more reliant on their systems, Washington concluded. Significantly, Griggs confirmed, their performance curve shows a sharp decline when technology is removed from the equation. Yours shows much more gradual degradation. Thornton studied the data with satisfaction. This is exactly what we've been working toward. Hayes is training his crews to be system operators. We're training to be tankers who can use systems when available but don't depend on them. Will that be enough to win, though? Wilson asked. The Sullivan Cup doesn't include many degraded system scenarios. True, Thornton acknowledged, but it does include surprises and unexpected challenges. That's where our approach will pay dividends. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who entered the room with a troubled expression. Sir, you need to see this, he said, handing Thornton a tablet. On the screen was a news article from Army Times with the headline, Future of Armor, Fort Benning Team Demonstrates Revolutionary Tank Control System. Below the headline was a photo of Colonel Hayes standing beside an M1A2 SEPV-4 Abrams, looking confidently into the camera. Thornton read the article quickly, his expression darkening. According to the piece, Hayes had unveiled a new, integrated battle management system that allegedly allowed a two-person crew to operate an Abrams with the same efficiency as a traditional four-person crew. The system used artificial intelligence to automate many of the loader and gunner functions, allowing a single individual to serve as both commander and gunner, while another operated as driver. He's playing to the budget hawks, Thornton said, handing the tablet back to Rodriguez, arguing that his system can cut personnel costs by 50% while maintaining combat effectiveness. Can it actually do that? Carter asked skeptically. On a test range with perfect conditions and no enemy returning fire? Maybe, Thornton conceded. In actual combat, not a chance. But Congress and the Pentagon bean counters won't see that distinction. He paced the small room, considering the implications. Hayes is changing the narrative. He's making this about innovation versus tradition, future versus past. And he's positioning himself as the visionary while painting us as dinosaurs resisting extinction. So what's our counter? Washington asked. Thornton thought for a moment, then turned to Wilson. Sergeant, your background is in systems integration, correct? Yes, sir. Studied computer engineering for 2 years before enlisting. I want you to analyze Hayes' system, find its vulnerabilities, its failure points. Every system has them, especially one as complex and ambitious as what he's proposing. Wilson nodded, clearly intrigued by the challenge. I'll need access to the technical specifications. They won't be publicly available, but I can get you what's been filed with the Army Research Laboratory, Thornton promised. Start there and extrapolate. To Carter and Washington, he said, continue with the degraded systems training, but increase the intensity. I want you performing at peak efficiency even with half the tank's systems offline. As they dispersed to their assignments, Thornton pulled Rodriguez aside. Any word from your contact at Benning? Rodriguez had a former platoon sergeant now serving as an instructor at Fort Benning who occasionally provided insights into Hayes' operation. Nothing specific about this new system, sir. But he did mention Hayes has been running his crews ragged 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Some of them are showing signs of burnout. Thornton nodded thoughtfully. Hayes always did push too hard, too fast. Keep the channel open. Any intelligence on his preparations could be valuable. For the next week, they intensified their training regimen, focusing particularly on operations under degraded conditions. Wilson spent hours analyzing what little information was available on Hayes's new system, identifying potential vulnerabilities. Carter and Washington worked tirelessly on their coordination, reducing their engagement times even further. Thornton, meanwhile, divided his attention between training with his crew and managing the broader political aspects of the competition. Montgomery kept him updated on developments in Washington, where the debate over armor's future continued to rage. Hayes had gained influential supporters on the House Armed Services Committee, while Thornton's more traditional approach was championed primarily by veterans and currently serving armor officers. The competition was no longer just about tanking skill, it had become a public relations battle as well. Hayes gave frequent interviews and demonstrations, showcasing his technological innovations to an eager press. Thornton, by contrast, kept his team focused and largely shielded from media attention, believing their performance in the actual competition would speak louder than any press conference. Then, 3 weeks before the Sullivan Cup was scheduled to begin, Wilson made a breakthrough in his analysis of Hayes's system. "I found it, sir," he announced, entering Thornton's office with a tablet filled with technical diagrams and code snippets, the fatal flaw in Hayes's integrated battle management system. Thornton looked up from the training schedule he'd been reviewing. "Let's hear it, Sergeant." Wilson laid the tablet on the desk, displaying a complex flowchart. The system depends on a continuous data link between the tank's subsystems and the central AI processor. If that link is disrupted for any reason, the automated functions fail. And when they fail, they don't gracefully degrade to manual operation. They crash completely. Meaning the tank becomes inoperable? Worse, sir, it becomes dangerous to its own crew. The autoloader continues its last command until manually overridden. The turret can lock in position, and the fire control system can generate false positives. Thornton frowned. That's a serious design flaw. How could it have passed Army testing protocols? It hasn't yet, sir. Hayes is using a development waiver for the Sullivan Cup. The system hasn't completed full certification. This was significant news. Hayes was gambling on an unproven system to showcase his vision of the future. If it performed flawlessly, he would be hailed as a visionary. If it failed, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for his team, but for his entire argument about technology replacing traditional crews. Good work, Sergeant. This information stays between us for now. I don't want Hayes getting wind that we've identified the system's weakness. Wilson hesitated. Sir, there's something else. I believe we could develop a countermeasure, a localized electromagnetic pulse that could disrupt the data link without permanently damaging the tank's systems. Thornton's eyebrows rose. You're suggesting we sabotage Hayes's tanks during the competition? Not sabotage, sir, just level the playing field. His tanks have technological advantages ours don't. This would temporarily neutralize those advantages. Thornton shook his head firmly. Absolutely not, Sergeant. We will win this competition, fairly or not at all. The integrity of the Armor Corps is what we're fighting for. We don't compromise that, even against someone like Hayes. Wilson looked disappointed but nodded his understanding. Yes, sir, sorry for suggesting it. Your initiative is commendable, Sergeant. Your ethics need work. Dismissed. After Wilson departed, Thornton sat back in his chair considering this new information. Hayes was taking a significant risk with his unproven system. That suggested either supreme confidence or desperate necessity. Either way, it created an opportunity Thornton could exploit without resorting to Wilson's unethical suggestion. If Hayes's system had the vulnerability Wilson had identified, it would be most likely to manifest under stress conditions. Rapid movement, multiple simultaneous engagements, electromagnetic interference from other systems. These were exactly the conditions Thornton had been training his crews to excel in. He picked up his phone and called Lieutenant Carter. Lieutenant, change of plans for tomorrow's exercise. I want to incorporate electronic warfare elements. Specifically, I want our tanks operating in an environment with significant EM interference. May I ask why, sir? Let's just say I want to ensure we're prepared for all contingencies. And Lieutenant, this stays within the team. Understood, sir. Thornton ended the call, his mind already formulating new training scenarios that would prepare his crews for the specific conditions that might cause Hayes' system to fail. They wouldn't cheat, but they would be ready to capitalize on any technical failures their opponent experienced. It was a fine ethical line, but one Thornton was comfortable with. After all, in real combat, electronic warfare was a legitimate tactic. Preparing for it wasn't cheating, it was comprehensive training. Fort Knox Maintenance Facility, April 18, 2025, 2200 hours. The cavernous maintenance bay was nearly deserted at this late hour. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor where 4 Abrams tanks sat in various states of disassembly. The air smelled of diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the distinctive metallic odor of tank ammunition. Thornton moved between the vehicles, inspecting the work being done by his crews. Despite the late hour, energy levels remained high. The Sullivan Cup was less than 2 weeks away, and every minute of preparation counted. He paused beside Iron Thunder, where Washington was supervising a maintenance team working on the autoloader mechanism. The sergeant's face showed fatigue, but also determination. The therapy sessions had been helping, his performance had improved steadily, and the flashbacks had diminished in both frequency and intensity. "How's it coming, Sergeant?" Thornton asked. Washington straightened from where he had been examining a component. "Making good progress, sir. We've increased the loading cycle speed by nearly half a second and improved the reliability of the mechanism." "Half a second can make all the difference," Thornton acknowledged. He lowered his voice. "And how are you doing? Personally, I mean." Washington's expression softened slightly. "Better, sir. The therapist has been helpful. Taught me some techniques for managing the flashbacks when they start." "Good. I'm glad to hear it." Thornton glanced around the maintenance bay. "Where's Wilson? I thought he was working on the fire control system calibration." "He was, sir. Said he needed to check something in the electronics shop. Should be back soon." Thornton nodded and continued his rounds, checking in with each crew. He found Carter with Rodriguez, reviewing technical manuals for the upcoming maintenance portion of the Sullivan Cup. "Lieutenant, a word?" he requested. Carter followed him to a quiet corner of the maintenance bay. "Yes, sir." "I received some intelligence from Montgomery today. Hayes is planning a major media demonstration of his integrated battle management system next week. He's invited members of Congress and senior Pentagon officials." Carter frowned. "Trying to build momentum before the Cup?" "Exactly. And there's more. The demonstration will include a direct comparison between his 2-person crew configuration and a standard 4-person crew. He's positioning it as the future versus the past. Psychological warfare," Carter observed, "trying to create a narrative that we're already obsolete before the competition even begins." Thornton nodded approvingly. The lieutenant's understanding of the broader political context had grown considerably over the past month. "Precisely, which is why we need a counter." "What did you have in mind, sir?" "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I believe Wilson may have some ideas. That's why I'm concerned about his absence." As if on cue, Wilson appeared from a side entrance, carrying a small electronic device Thornton didn't recognize. When he spotted Thornton and Carter, he quickly pocketed the device and approached them. "Sir, Lieutenant," he greeted them with a slightly too casual nod. "Sergeant Wilson," Thornton acknowledged. "What's that device you just pocketed?" Wilson hesitated, then slowly removed the device from his pocket. It was roughly the size of a smartphone, but thicker, with various ports and a small antenna. "It's a signal analyzer, sir, for detecting electromagnetic interference." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "And why do you have it?" Wilson glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before answering. "I've been monitoring our communications during exercises. I've detected unusual interference patterns that don't match standard Army or civilian frequencies." "Are you suggesting someone is jamming our communications?" Carter asked, alarmed. "Not jamming, ma'am. More like monitoring, possibly recording." Thornton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Hayes?" "Can't confirm that, sir. But the signal characteristics are consistent with advanced SIGINT equipment. Military grade, not civilian. If Hayes was monitoring their communications, he would have insight into their training methods, their technical adjustments, and potentially their strategy for the Sullivan Cup. It wasn't illegal, strictly speaking, but it certainly violated the spirit of fair competition." "Have you mentioned this to anyone else?" Thornton asked. "No, sir, just figured it out today." "Good, keep it that way." Thornton considered their options. "Can you modify our communications to prevent this monitoring?" "Already working on it, sir. I can implement frequency hopping and encryption that should block most monitoring attempts." "Do it," Thornton ordered. "And Wilson, I want a full security sweep of our training areas and vehicles. Look for any unauthorized devices or signals." "Yes, sir." As Wilson departed to begin the security measures, Carter looked troubled. "If Hayes is monitoring us, He could be several steps ahead in terms of countering our strategy. Or several steps behind, Thornton replied. Remember our focus on degraded operations? That doesn't translate well through electronic monitoring. He might see our performance metrics, but he won't understand the philosophy behind them. Carter nodded, but her concern remained evident. Still, sir, it feels like we're constantly playing catch-up. Hayes has newer tanks, more resources, political support, and now intelligence on our operations. That's how it often is in warfare, Lieutenant. The enemy has advantages you don't. Your job isn't to wish those advantages away. It's to overcome them through superior training, tactics, and resolve. He placed a hand on her shoulder, an uncharacteristically paternal gesture. Besides, we have something Hayes doesn't. What's that, sir? A crew that functions as a team, not as components in a system. Hayes sees his tanks as platforms for technology. We see ours as extensions of ourselves. That human element is what will make the difference. They worked late into the night, completing maintenance on the tanks while Wilson implemented security measures for their communications. By the time Thornton finally left the maintenance bay at 0200, he was exhausted but satisfied with their progress. As he walked to his quarters, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made the sender's identity clear. Your obsolete tactics won't save you or the dinosaurs you're trying to preserve. The future is coming, whether you're ready or not. Hayes. Thornton stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Hayes was trying to get into his head, to throw him off balance. It was a tactic Thornton had seen before, from enemies both foreign and domestic. It wouldn't work. Still, the message confirmed what Thornton had suspected. Hayes saw this competition as personal, not just professional. That made him dangerous but also predictable. A man fighting for ego was more likely to make mistakes than a man fighting for principle. And Thornton was very much fighting for principle. Fort Knox Training Area, April 25, 2025, 1,000 hours. 1 week before the Sullivan Cup, Thornton ordered a full-dress rehearsal. The entire platoon would run through each phase of the competition under conditions matching those they would face in the actual event. It was their final major training evolution before the competition began. The maintenance test came first. Each crew was required to identify and repair a series of deliberately induced malfunctions in their tanks within a strict time limit. Thornton observed as his crews methodically worked through the problems, displaying the thorough knowledge of their vehicles he had insisted upon throughout their training. Wilson particularly excelled in this phase, his technical expertise allowing him to identify issues that stumped even the maintenance instructors. Washington's strength and systematic approach made short work of the physical repairs. Carter's attention to detail ensured nothing was overlooked. When all 4 crews completed the maintenance phase successfully, they moved on to the physical fitness test. This consisted of a grueling course that simulated the physical demands of tank operations. Loading heavy rounds, evacuating casualties from a tank, running while carrying ammunition, and performing weapons manipulation tasks while under physical stress. Despite his age, Thornton completed the course alongside his crews, finishing with a respectable time that put him in the middle of the pack. Washington, not surprisingly, dominated this event with his powerful build and endurance. Carter held her own, finishing ahead of several of the male crew members. Wilson struggled with some of the strength elements, but compensated with speed in the technical portions. Next came the navigation course. Using only paper maps and compasses, the crews had to navigate their tanks through difficult terrain to a series of checkpoints within a time limit. This was where Thornton expected his emphasis on fundamental skills to pay the greatest dividends. He wasn't disappointed. All 4 crews completed the course well under the maximum allowed time, with Rodriguez's tank finishing with the best overall score. Iron Thunder came in a close second, with Carter proving particularly adept at land navigation. The gunnery phase followed, with each crew engaging a series of targets under varying conditions: stationary, moving, partial cover, multiple targets, and degraded systems. This was the heart of tank operations, and Thornton watched with pride as his crews performed nearly flawlessly. Carter's gunnery had improved dramatically over the past month. Her engagement times now rivaled those of veteran combat gunners, and her accuracy remained exceptional even under the most challenging conditions. Washington's loading was smooth and consistent, without a trace of the hesitation that had once plagued him. Wilson's driving positioned the tank perfectly for each engagement, maximizing their chances of first-round hits. By late afternoon, they were ready for the final and most complex phase, the tactical exercise. This combined all elements of tank operations in a simulated combat scenario, testing not just individual skills, but crew cohesion and tactical decision-making. Thornton chose to observe this phase rather than participate, allowing Washington to command Iron Thunder while he monitored overall platoon performance from a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter circling overhead. The scenario involved a movement to contact against an OPFOR element equipped with both armor and anti-tank systems. The terrain was challenging with limited visibility and multiple avenues of approach. It would test everything they had learned over the past 6 weeks. From his aerial vantage point, Thornton watched as his platoon moved out in a modified wedge formation, maintaining proper intervals and security. They navigated the difficult terrain with confidence, using microterrain for cover while maintaining their offensive momentum. When they made contact with the OPFOR, their response was textbook. Washington directed Iron Thunder to a hull-down position that offered excellent fields of fire while minimizing their exposure. Rodriguez's tank provided covering fire, while the other 2 tanks maneuvered to the flanks. The OPFOR, consisting of instructors from the armor school, fought with skill and determination, but they were outmatched by Thornton's now well-oiled machine of a platoon. Within 20 minutes, the exercise was declared complete, with Thornton's platoon achieving all objectives with minimal simulated casualties. As the helicopter landed near the assembly area, Thornton felt a surge of pride. His crews had performed superbly. They were ready. The platoon gathered around him as he stepped off the helicopter, their faces streaked with sweat and dust, but glowing with the satisfaction of a job well done. "Outstanding performance," Thornton told them, his voice carrying across the assembled group. "Every one of you has exceeded my expectations. You've transformed from a demonstration unit into a combat-ready tank platoon capable of taking on any challenge." He looked each crew member in the eye as he continued. "Next week, we face the Sullivan Cup. You've seen the media coverage. You know what they're saying. Fort Benning is the favorite. Their new technology gives them the edge. They represent the future while we represent the past." He paused, letting the familiar narrative sink in. But here's what they don't understand. Tanks aren't just machines. They're the physical embodiment of the human will to fight. The technology is important, yes, but it's the crew that makes a tank lethal. Your judgment, your courage, your teamwork. That's what wins battles. Washington stepped forward. "Sir, permission to address the platoon?" Thornton nodded, curious about what the normally reserved sergeant wanted to say. "Most of you know my story by now," Washington began, his deep voice carrying authority. "I lost my crew in Iraq. For years I carried that weight alone, thinking I had failed them somehow. But what I've learned these past weeks is that a tank crew isn't just 4 people sharing a steel box. It's a family. And like any family, its strength comes from trust and mutual support." He looked around at the assembled soldiers. "That's what Colonel Thornton has built here. Not just crews, but families. Not just a platoon, but a community bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. That's what will make the difference next week." A murmur of agreement ran through the platoon. Thornton was moved by Washington's words, recognizing in them the transformation that had occurred not just in the sergeant, but in all of them. "Well said, Sergeant," Thornton acknowledged. "Now let's get these tanks ready for transport to the competition site. Final checks on all systems. I want everything perfect when we roll into Sullivan Cup." As the platoon dispersed to their tasks, Thornton pulled his primary crew aside. "One last thing, I've just received word that Hayes's media demonstration yesterday didn't go entirely as planned. There was some kind of malfunction with his integrated battle management system during a live fire demonstration." "What kind of malfunction?" Wilson asked, perhaps a bit too eagerly. "The details are sketchy, but apparently the autoloader cycling rate degraded significantly under sustained fire. They had to revert to manual loading for the remainder of the demonstration." Carter looked thoughtful. "That matches Sergeant Wilson's analysis of the system's vulnerabilities. Sustained operations cause heat buildup in the processors, which can lead to data transmission delays." "Exactly," Thornton confirmed. "Hayes is downplaying the incident, calling it a minor glitch that's already been resolved, but it suggests his system isn't as robust as he claims." "Will he still use it in the competition?" Washington asked. "According to Montgomery's sources, yes. Hayes has too much political capital invested in the system to abandon it now, but he's likely working around the clock to implement fixes." Wilson looked concerned. Sir, if they're rushing modifications without proper testing, they could be introducing new vulnerabilities or even safety issues. That's Hayes's problem, not ours, Thornton said firmly. Our focus remains on our own performance, but this information does suggest a strategy for the competition. If Hayes's system has thermal management issues, then prolonged high-intensity engagements will work to our advantage. So we aim to draw out the scenarios, force sustained operations, Carter asked. When possible, yes, but we still prepare for all contingencies. Hayes is resourceful. He won't make the same mistake twice if he can help it. Washington nodded thoughtfully. There's something else to consider, sir. If Hayes's system fails during the Cup, it won't just affect the competition. It could discredit his entire argument about automation replacing human crews. True, Thornton agreed, but the reverse is also true. If his system performs flawlessly, it strengthens his position considerably. That's why we can't count on his failure. We need to be good enough to beat him at his best. The weight of that reality settled over all of them. They had made tremendous progress, but Hayes's team still held significant advantages in technology and resources. Victory would require not just skill, but perfect execution and perhaps a bit of luck. As his crew moved off to begin final preparations, Thornton remained alone for a moment, gazing across the training area where his tanks were positioned. 6 weeks ago, they had been a collection of individuals with varying skills and perspectives. Now they were a cohesive unit, bound by shared experience and mutual trust. Whatever happened in the Sullivan Cup, Thornton had already achieved something significant. He had reminded these soldiers, and perhaps himself as well, that the true strength of the Armor Corps lay not in its machines but in its people. That was a legacy worth preserving, regardless of the competition's outcome. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Montgomery. "Jack," the general's voice was tense. "We've got a situation. Hayes has gone to the media, claiming your team has been conducting electronic surveillance on his operations. He's demanding an investigation and suggesting the competition be delayed pending the results." Thornton felt a surge of anger. Hayes was projecting his own actions onto them, a classic deflection tactic. "That's absurd, Bill. We've been the ones being monitored, not the other way around." "Can you prove that?" "Sergeant Wilson has documented unusual signal patterns consistent with SIGINT equipment. We've been implementing countermeasures." Montgomery sighed heavily. "This is turning into a circus, Jack. Hayes has senators calling for hearings on the future of armor. The media is framing this as old guard versus new thinking. And now these allegations of espionage. It's exactly what we wanted to avoid." "The truth will come out in the competition itself," Thornton said firmly. "When my crews outperform his despite his technological advantages, the argument answers itself." "I hope you're right," Montgomery said, not sounding entirely convinced. "The Secretary is watching this closely now. There's a lot riding on your performance. More than just the future of tanks. It's about how the Army approaches modernization itself." After ending the call, Thornton stared at his phone for a long moment. The stakes continued to escalate. What had begun as a tank crew competition had evolved into a referendum on military doctrine and procurement policy. Hayes was playing a political game, using media and congressional connections to advance his agenda. Thornton had never been comfortable in that arena. He was a soldier, not a politician. But he recognized that sometimes defending what you believed in required fighting on unfamiliar ground. If Hayes wanted to make this a public spectacle, then Thornton would need to ensure his team's performance was so undeniably superior that no amount of political maneuvering could obscure it. He gathered his thoughts and headed back to where his crews were working. There was still much to do before the competition began, and precious little time to do it. As he approached Iron Thunder, he noticed Washington and Wilson engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion beside the tank. He couldn't hear their words, but their body language suggested significant disagreement. Carter stood nearby, seemingly trying to mediate. Thornton quickened his pace. The last thing they needed now was internal conflict. "Problem, gentlemen?" The three turned to face him, tension evident in their postures. After a moment of awkward silence, Wilson spoke. "Sir, I was just expressing some concerns about our strategy for the competition. I believe we're being too conservative in our approach." "Explain," Thornton prompted. Wilson gestured toward the tank. "We've been focusing on fundamental skills and degraded operations, which is important, but we're not fully utilizing the capabilities of our tanks. The SEPV-2 has advanced features we've barely touched because we're so focused on operating without them." Washington crossed his arms. And I was explaining to the sergeant that those advanced features are precisely what fail when you need them most. We need to be proficient with the basics first. It doesn't have to be either or, Wilson argued. We can master the fundamentals while also leveraging technology. Hayes is going all in on automation. We're going all in on tradition. But the sweet spot is probably somewhere in between. Thornton considered Wilson's point. The young sergeant had a valid argument. In their determination to prove that fundamental skills mattered more than technology, they might have overcompensated by neglecting legitimate technological advantages. You both have valid points, Thornton acknowledged. Lieutenant, what's your take? Carter thought for a moment before responding. I think we need to maintain our focus on fundamentals, sir. That's our competitive advantage. But Sergeant Wilson is right that we shouldn't ignore the technology available to us. Perhaps we can develop a hybrid approach for the competition. Thornton nodded slowly. A hybrid approach. Using technology when it offers clear advantages, but maintaining proficiency without it when necessary. That's essentially what I've been advocating all along, though perhaps our training has emphasized the latter more than the former. He made a decision. For our final week of preparation, we'll focus on integrating the advanced features of the SCP-2 into our operations. Not becoming dependent on them, but using them to enhance our already solid fundamental skills. This compromise seemed to satisfy both Washington and Wilson, though tension still lingered between them. Thornton made a mental note to address that issue privately later. They couldn't afford any rifts within the crew, not this close to the competition. As they resumed their preparations, Thornton reflected on the irony of the situation. In trying to defend the traditional approach to tank warfare, he had perhaps become too traditional, too rigid in his methods. Wilson's challenge was a healthy reminder that innovation and tradition weren't mutually exclusive. The best approach incorporated elements of both. This insight gave him a new perspective on Hayes as well. His rival wasn't wrong to pursue technological advancement. His error lay in seeing technology as a replacement for human skill and judgment rather than an enhancement of it. If Thornton could demonstrate a more balanced approach, one that valued both human elements and technological capabilities, he might not just win the competition, but change the terms of the debate itself. With renewed determination, he joined his crew in preparing Iron Thunder for transport to the Sullivan Cup. They had 1 week left to perfect their approach, to find that sweet spot between tradition and innovation. 1 week to save the soul of the Armor Corps and ensure that tanks remained a vital part of American ground combat power for decades to come. The real battle was about to begin. Sullivan Cup Competition Grounds, Fort Knox, Kentucky, May 3rd. 600 hours. Dawn broke over Fort Knox as Colonel Jack Thornton stood on a small rise overlooking the Sullivan Cup competition grounds. The first golden rays illuminated 4 Abrams tanks positioned in a perfect line, their freshly painted hulls gleaming. The American flag flew above the headquarters building, snapping in the brisk morning breeze. In 6 hours, the competition would officially begin. After weeks of preparation, after overcoming doubt and exhaustion, after forging a disparate group of soldiers into a cohesive team, the moment of truth had arrived. Thornton felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always preceded combat. The Sullivan Cup wasn't war, but in many ways the stakes felt just as high. The future of American armor hung in the balance. The tradition he had devoted his life to defending was being challenged not by a foreign adversary, but by changing doctrine and budget priorities. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Lieutenant Carter climbing the hill to join him. She carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to him. "Thought you could use this, sir. You've been up here since before first light." Thornton accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Couldn't sleep, too much on my mind." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the activity below as competition officials made final preparations and the first spectators began to arrive. "Hayes' team arrived last night," Carter said finally. "Their tanks are in the maintenance facility. 4 SCP-V4 Abrams with the new integrated battle management system fully installed." Thornton nodded. "And the allegations of electronic surveillance?" "Investigation found no evidence supporting his claims. The competition committee dismissed them this morning." As expected, Hayes was projecting his own actions onto us. Classic misdirection. Carter sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "Sir, may I ask you something personal?" Thornton raised an eyebrow but nodded his permission. "Why does this matter so much to you? Beyond the obvious professional stakes, I mean. This feels personal." The question caught Thornton off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Carter had proven herself observant and insightful throughout their training. I suppose it is personal, he admitted after a long moment. I've spent my entire adult life in tanks, from lieutenant to colonel, from Desert Storm to Iraq to Afghanistan. I've watched good men die in these machines, and I've seen them save countless lives. He gazed across the competition grounds, his eyes distant with memory. Tanks aren't just weapons, Lieutenant. They're the embodiment of a philosophy about warfare. The belief that soldiers on the ground, face to face with the enemy, will always be the decisive factor in combat. Hayes wants to remove that human element, to turn warfare into a remote, clinical exercise managed by algorithms and distant operators. And you think that's wrong? Carter asked. I think it's dangerous, Thornton corrected. Technology fails, systems crash, communications get jammed. When that happens, you need soldiers with judgment, initiative, and courage. You need humans who can make ethical decisions in chaotic conditions. That's what's at stake here. Not just budget dollars or force structure, but the very nature of how America fights its wars. Carter nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's why you've pushed us so hard on operating with degraded systems. Exactly. Hayes believes the future lies in perfect technology. I believe it lies in resilient humans using technology as a tool, not a crutch. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Washington and Wilson, both in their dress uniforms, ready for the opening ceremonies. Sir, the team is assembled and ready for inspection, Washington reported. Thornton checked his watch. It was time. Let's go. As they descended the hill toward the assembly area, Thornton could see the other teams gathered near the reviewing stand. Fort Benning was prominently positioned front and center, their uniforms crisp, their posture perfect. Colonel Hayes stood before them, his silver hair and ramrod straight bearing making him instantly recognizable. Thornton led his team to their designated position, consciously ignoring Hayes's presence. This wasn't the time for personal confrontation. That would come later in the competition itself. The opening ceremony was mercifully brief. A series of speeches by senior officers and competition officials, an explanation of the rules and scoring system, and finally the announcement of the first event, the maintenance test scheduled to begin at 1,000 hours. As the teams dispersed to make final preparations, Thornton gathered his crew for one last briefing. This is it, he told them, his voice low but intense. Everything we've worked for comes down to the next 3 days. You're ready. You're the finest tank crew I've ever served with, and I've been doing this a very long time. He looked each of them in the eye as he continued. Whatever happens in this competition, remember this. You represent the best traditions of the Armor Corps, skill, courage, teamwork, and the unbreakable bond between soldiers who fight together. Washington nodded solemnly. We won't let you down, sir. I know you won't, Thornton replied. Now let's go show them what real tankers look like. Sullivan Cup maintenance test, 10-15 hours. The maintenance test was designed to evaluate each crew's technical knowledge and ability to identify and repair malfunctions under time pressure. Each team was assigned a tank with 5 deliberately induced problems ranging from simple to complex. They had 30 minutes to identify all issues and complete the repairs. Thornton's team approached their assigned vehicle, an M1A2 SCPV-2 similar to their training tanks, but unfamiliar in its specific quirks and history. They had 15 minutes to inspect the vehicle before the actual test began. Wilson, you take the engine compartment, Thornton directed. Lieutenant, weapons systems. Washington, drivetrain and suspension. I'll check the turret mechanisms. They moved with practiced efficiency, each focusing on their assigned area. The inspection period passed quickly, and soon a horn signaled the beginning of the timed portion of the test. Found the first issue, Wilson reported almost immediately. Fuel filter is clogged. Simple fix. Gunner's primary sight is misaligned, Carter added, peering through the optical system. Adjustment required. Washington emerged from beneath the tank, grease already smearing his uniform. Left torsion bar is improperly tensioned. Could cause track slippage under load. Thornton discovered the remaining 2 issues. A faulty seal in the hydraulic system for turret rotation and an electrical problem affecting the commander's weapon station. All 5 malfunctions identified in less than 10 minutes. Now they had to fix them. They worked seamlessly as a team, each addressing their identified issue while assisting others as needed. Wilson's technical expertise proved invaluable in troubleshooting the electrical problem, while Washington's strength made quick work of the torsion bar adjustment. Carter, with her meticulous attention to detail, perfectly realigned the gunner's sight. Thornton supervised the overall effort while replacing the hydraulic seal. Time, announced the chief judge, exactly 30 minutes after they had begun. The inspection team moved in to verify that all malfunctions had been properly corrected. As they waited for the results, Thornton glanced across the competition area where Hayes' team was completing their own maintenance test. They had finished several minutes earlier, a fact Hayes seemed eager to emphasize by having his team stand at attention while others still worked. Showing off, Washington muttered, noticing Thornton's gaze. Finishing fast doesn't mean finishing right. The judges completed their inspection, conferring briefly before approaching Thornton. All 5 malfunctions correctly identified and properly repaired, the chief judge confirmed. Clean test, Colonel. Well done. Thornton thanked the judge, then gathered his team. Good work, all of you. But this was the easy part. The physical fitness test is next, followed by navigation this afternoon. How did Benning do? Wilson asked, nodding toward Hayes' team. They finished faster, Thornton acknowledged. But speed isn't the only factor in scoring. Technique and thoroughness count as well. The official results were announced an hour later. Fort Benning had indeed taken first place in the maintenance test, but by only a narrow margin. Fort Knox placed second, with the other competing teams trailing significantly behind. It wasn't the start Thornton had hoped for, but neither was it cause for concern. The competition had only just begun. The physical fitness test that followed was more encouraging. Washington dominated the heavy lifting elements, while Carter excelled in the precision tasks. Wilson's endurance compensated for his lesser strength, and Thornton himself performed respectably, despite being the oldest competitor by more than a decade. When the scores were tallied, Fort Knox had closed the gap with Fort Benning significantly. By late afternoon, as they prepared for the navigation course, Thornton's team had found their rhythm. The nervous energy of the morning had been replaced by focused determination. They were no longer thinking about Hayes or the political implications of the competition. They were simply doing what they had trained to do. The navigation course proved to be more challenging than expected. A sudden rainstorm had turned much of the terrain to mud, making precise movement difficult in obscuring landmarks. Once again, Thornton's emphasis on fundamental skills proved valuable. While other teams struggled with GPS systems affected by the weather, Fort Knox relied on map and compass navigation, methodically locating each checkpoint despite the adverse conditions. When they completed the course, soaked to the skin but triumphant, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. General Montgomery stood under an umbrella near the finish line, accompanied by a group of officers and civilians Thornton didn't recognize. "Outstanding performance, Colonel," Montgomery said as Thornton approached. "I'd like you to meet some people who've been watching with great interest." He introduced several members of the House Armed Services Committee and 2 senior Pentagon officials. Their presence underscored the political significance of the competition, reminding Thornton of exactly how much was at stake. "Very impressive navigation in these conditions," one of the congressmen commented, "especially without relying on GPS." "Thank you, sir," Thornton replied. "We believe in mastering the basics. Technology is a tool, not a replacement for fundamental skills." "An old-fashioned approach," the congressman observed, though his tone suggested approval rather than criticism. "Refreshing to see in this digital age." As the dignitaries moved on to observe other teams, Montgomery lingered behind. "You've made up significant ground today, Jack." Hayes is worried. His team struggled with the navigation course when their systems started glitching in the rain. "Is that why the committee members are here, to see the contrast in approaches?" Montgomery nodded. "Partly. They're also here because Hayes has been lobbying them heavily. He's promised that his integrated battle management system will revolutionize armored warfare. Today's performance raised some doubts about that claim." "The real test comes tomorrow," Thornton said. "Gunnery and tactical exercise. That's where his system is supposed to shine. And where it's most vulnerable to failure," Montgomery added. "Be ready for anything, Jack. Hayes is desperate for a win. He'll pull out all the stops." With that warning in mind, Thornton gathered his team for an evening briefing. They had completed the first day in second place overall, trailing Fort Benning by only a small margin. Tomorrow's events would decide everything. "We've done well," he told them in the privacy of their assigned maintenance bay. "But tomorrow is where this competition is won or lost. The gunnery phase plays to Hayes' technological advantages. The tactical exercise tests everything at once." "What's our approach for gunnery, sir?" Carter asked. "We stick to our training. Perfect execution of fundamentals, leveraging technology where appropriate, but not becoming dependent on it. Hayes's system is fast when it works properly, but Wilson's analysis suggests it's vulnerable to sustained operations. Wilson nodded in confirmation. The processors generate heat under continuous use. That affects data transmission rates and system responsiveness. If we can force them into extended engagements, their performance might degrade. How do we do that? Washington asked. By being perfect ourselves, Thornton said simply. If we execute flawlessly, the judges will extend the scenario to differentiate between teams. That means more targets, more complex engagements. Exactly the conditions that stress Hayes's system. They spent another hour reviewing the specifics of the gunnery course. Then Thornton ordered them to get rest. Tomorrow would test not just their skills, but their endurance and mental toughness as well. As the others departed, Washington lingered behind. Once they were alone, he spoke quietly. Sir, I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, this experience has been healing for me. Working with you, understanding what really happened in Ramadi, facing those memories instead of running from them. It's made a difference. Thornton was touched by the sergeant's candor. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus. You're an exceptional soldier. Don't let anyone tell you different, especially yourself. Washington nodded, a rare smile crossing his usually stoic features. One more thing, sir. The team. We've been talking. We know how much this competition means to you, to your legacy. We won't let you down. I never thought you would, Thornton assured him. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we make history. Sullivan Cup gunnery phase, May 4th. Hours, 25:0800 hour. The gunnery range at Fort Knox stretched for nearly 3 kilometers, a vast expanse of rolling terrain dotted with both stationary and moving targets. The morning air was clear and cool, perfect conditions for the most technical phase of the competition. Thornton's crew had drawn the third position in the rotation, meaning they would observe 2 other teams, including Fort Benning, before taking their turn. This was potentially advantageous, allowing them to gauge the judges' expectations and the difficulty of the course. They stood on the observation platform as Hayes's crew entered their tank. The SEPV-4 Abrams looked externally similar to their own vehicles, but Thornton knew the interior was radically different. Instead of the traditional 4-man crew, Hayes had only 2 men inside, himself as commander, gunner, and a driver. The loader's position was occupied by the automated system, with additional computer interfaces where the human gunner would normally sit. Beginning Run 1, Fort Benning announced the range controller over the loudspeaker. Stand by. A horn sounded, and Hayes's tank began moving along the designated route. As it crested the first rise, targets began to appear. First, a single stationary tank at 1,500 meters, then multiple moving targets representing armored personnel carriers. The SEPV-4's main gun roared repeatedly, each shot finding its mark with impressive speed and accuracy. 4.1 seconds average engagement time, Wilson murmured, timing the shots, slightly faster than their training data. Thornton nodded, watching intently as Hayes's tank continued through the course. The performance was undeniably impressive. The automated loading system worked flawlessly, and the integrated fire control system acquired and engaged targets with machine-like precision. Then, as the tank approached the final phase of the course, a complex scenario with multiple targets appearing simultaneously at varying ranges, something changed. The time between target appearance and engagement began to lengthen. Not dramatically, but noticeably to experienced observers. 7.2 seconds on that last one, Wilson reported, his voice betraying his excitement. The system's degrading under sustained operation, just like we predicted. Thornton kept his expression neutral, but inwardly he felt a surge of satisfaction. Hayes's technological marvel wasn't as infallible as he claimed. The question was whether the judges would notice the degradation and whether it would be significant enough to affect the overall scoring. Fort Benning completed the course with an impressive but not perfect performance. The second team from Fort Hood delivered a solid but unspectacular run. Then it was Fort Knox's turn. As they approached Iron Thunder, Thornton gathered his crew for one final word. Remember your training, trust each other, execute fundamentals perfectly. The technology supports you, but you control the tank, not the other way around. They mounted the tank and took their positions. Thornton in the commander's hatch, Carter at the gunner's station, Washington as loader, and Wilson in the driver's compartment. The familiar confines of the tank's interior felt like home, each control and display exactly where it should be. Fort Knox, ready to commence? Thornton reported over the radio. Fort Knox, cleared to begin. Stand by for horn. The horn sounded, and Wilson eased the massive vehicle forward with his characteristic precision. They moved smoothly up the first incline, Thornton scanning the terrain ahead through his commander's sight. Target tank, 12 o'clock, range 1500 meters, he called as the first target appeared. Identified, Carter confirmed. Sabot loaded. Fire and adjust, Thornton ordered. Carter squeezed the trigger, and the main gun thundered. Through his sight, Thornton watched as the round struck the target dead center. Target destroyed, he confirmed. Scan and continue. They proceeded through the course with methodical precision. Each target was engaged according to protocol, with no wasted movement or hesitation. Washington's loading was flawless, Carter's gunnery precise, and Wilson's driving positioned the tank perfectly for each engagement. Thornton coordinated it all with the calm authority that had made him a legend in the armor community. Unlike Hayes's automated system, their performance didn't degrade as the course progressed. If anything, they improved, settling into a rhythm that allowed them to shave precious fractions of a second off each engagement time. By the time they reached the final phase, the complex multi-target scenario, they were operating at peak efficiency. Multiple targets, Thornton announced as 5 targets appeared simultaneously. Tank at 2 o'clock, priority. APCs at 10, 11, 1, and 3, secondary. Identified, Carter confirmed. Engaging tank. The main gun fired, destroying the priority target. Carter immediately traversed to the next threat without waiting for confirmation, trusting her training and instincts. Target destroyed, engaging APC at 10 o'clock. The coaxial machine gun chattered, riddling the target with simulated rounds. Carter continued traversing and firing, engaging each target in a sequence with devastating effect. Washington kept pace with her, loading the main gun between engagements without a single fumbled round. When the final target fell, a horn sounded, signaling the end of their run. The official time flashed on the scoreboard, 6 minutes and 22 seconds for the entire course, with an average engagement time of 5.8 seconds. Not as fast as Fort Benning's best times, but significantly better than their degraded performance in the later stages. Outstanding job, Thornton told his crew as they exited the tank. Textbook execution. The judges conferred for nearly 30 minutes before announcing the results of the gunnery phase. Fort Benning took first place by a narrow margin, with Fort Knox in second. However, when combined with the previous day's events, the overall standings showed the two teams tied for first place entering the final phase, the tactical exercise. As they prepared for the decisive event, scheduled for that afternoon, Thornton received an unexpected visitor. General Montgomery approached him as he was reviewing the tactical exercise parameters with his crew. "A moment, Colonel," the general requested. Thornton excused himself and followed Montgomery to a quiet corner of the preparation area. "You've done exceptionally well, Jack," Montgomery began. "Better than anyone expected. The committee members are impressed, especially with your crew's consistent performance compared to Hayes's degradation issues." "Thank you, sir, but I sense there's more to this conversation." Montgomery looked uncomfortable. "There's been a development. Hayes has filed a formal protest regarding the gunnery phase scoring. He's claiming the judges didn't properly account for the technological differences between the vehicles." "That's ridiculous," Thornton said, anger rising. "The competition has always been about crew performance, not technology. If his system degraded under pressure, that's a legitimate factor in scoring." "I agree, but the competition committee is under significant pressure. Hayes has powerful allies. The protest has been referred to the head judge for review, with a decision expected before the tactical phase begins." Thornton absorbed this news, his jaw tightening. "So even if we win fairly, Hayes might steal the victory through politics." "It's possible," Montgomery admitted, "which is why I'm advising you to make the tactical phase victory so overwhelming that no amount of politicking can change the outcome. You need to dominate, Jack." "We intend to, sir." As Montgomery departed, Thornton rejoined his crew, sharing the news of Hayes's protest. Rather than demoralizing them, the information seemed to strengthen their resolve. "So that's how he wants to play it," Washington said, his voice hard. "Can't win fairly, so he's working the system." "Typical," Wilson agreed, surprising Thornton with his vehemence. "All that talk about embracing the future, but he can't accept when the future doesn't work as advertised." "It doesn't matter," Thornton told them. "Our job remains the same. Execute the tactical phase perfectly. Make the victory so clear that no one can question it. The tactical exercise was scheduled for 1,500 hours. Unlike the previous phases, which focused on specific skills, this would test their ability to operate as a complete tank crew under simulated combat conditions. The scenario involved a movement to contact through complex terrain, engagement with both armored and infantry OPFOR elements, and coordination with simulated friendly units. Each team would have its own identical course to run, with scoring based on mission accomplishment, time to completion, ammunition expenditure, and casualties sustained. The judges would observe from both ground positions and aerial platforms, ensuring complete visibility of each team's performance. As the designated time approached, Thornton led his crew through final preparations. Every piece of equipment was checked and rechecked. Communication protocols were reviewed. Contingency plans established for various scenarios. Nothing was left to chance. At precisely 1,500 hours, a horn sounded, and the tactical phase began. Fort Hood went first, followed by Fort Benning. From their staging area, Thornton could hear the distant thunder of main gunfire as Hayes's crew engaged targets on their course. Finally, at 1630, it was Fort Knox's turn. Iron Thunder moved out from the start line with purposeful determination. Wilson navigated the difficult terrain with masterful precision, using microterrain for cover while maintaining their forward momentum. Thornton, standing in the commander's hatch, scanned the horizon for threats, his experienced eyes catching details others might miss. "Contact, infantry, tree line at 2 o'clock, 800 meters, he called, spotting movement among the trees. Carter traversed the turret and engaged with the coaxial machine gun, suppressing the infantry position, while Wilson maneuvered the tank to a more advantageous position. They continued forward, encountering and defeating a series of progressively more challenging threats. Everything was proceeding perfectly until they reached the midpoint of the course. As they crested a rise, they encountered a far more complex situation than expected. A simulated enemy strongpoint defended by multiple armored vehicles and infantry anti-tank teams. Ambush, Thornton assessed instantly. Driver, reverse to hold down position. Gunner, identify priority targets. Loader, heat ready. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, withdrawing to a protected position while preparing to engage. Carter identified a dug-in tank as the primary threat, with anti-tank teams as secondary targets. Target identified, tank, partial defilade, 1100 meters, she reported. Fire when ready, Thornton ordered. The main gun roared and the target was destroyed. They engaged the remaining threats methodically, maneuvering between firing positions to avoid becoming predictable. The judges had created a scenario far more complex than the standard competition course, testing not just their technical skills, but their tactical judgment as well. After clearing the strong point, they continued toward their final objective. As they approached, Thornton spotted another tank hull down behind a berm, its turret just visible above the ridgeline. Target tank, 12 o'clock, 1600 meters. Hull down, he called. Identified, Carter confirmed. Sabot loaded. Wait, Thornton ordered, something catching his attention. That's not a tank. Check the thermal signature. Carter switched to thermal imaging. Sir, it's reading cold. It's a decoy. Exactly. The real threat is elsewhere. Driver, hold position. Everyone scan sectors. Their caution was rewarded when the actual threat revealed itself. 2 armored vehicles attempting to flank their position from the east. Having avoided the trap, they engaged and destroyed these targets efficiently, then proceeded to secure the objective with minimal simulated casualties. The horn sounded, signaling the end of their run. The official time was displayed, 42 minutes and 18 seconds, nearly 8 minutes faster than Fort Benning's time. They had completed the course with perfect mission accomplishment, minimal ammunition expenditure, and 0 casualties. As they exited the tank, Thornton could see the judges conferring, their expressions revealing nothing. The other teams gathered near the reviewing stand where the final results would be announced. Hayes stood with his crew, his face tight with controlled anger. He had expected to dominate this competition, to use it as a showcase for his vision of armor's future. Instead, he found himself in a desperate fight against an approach he had dismissed as obsolete. General Montgomery approached Thornton, accompanied by the committee members who had been observing throughout the competition. Remarkable performance, Colonel, one of the congressmen said. Especially that moment when you identified the decoy tank. That wasn't part of the standard course, was it? No, sir, Thornton confirmed. The judges added it specifically for our run. And yet you spotted it immediately. How? Experience, Thornton said simply. No decoy perfectly mimics the real thing. There are always tells if you know what to look for. The congressman nodded thoughtfully. The kind of judgment no AI system could replicate. Not yet, Thornton acknowledged. Perhaps not ever. Human intuition and experience are difficult to algorithm. The conversation was interrupted by the announcement that the final scores had been calculated. All teams were called to assemble at the reviewing stand. The head judge, a retired colonel with decades of armor experience, stood at the microphone. Before announcing the final results, I must address a formal protest that was filed regarding the scoring of the gunnery phase, he began. After careful review of the judge's notes and video evidence, the protest has been denied. The original scoring stands. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Hayes's face darkened further, his fists clenching at his sides. Thornton maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly he felt a surge of satisfaction. The competition would be decided on merit, not politics. Now the final results of the 2025 Sullivan Cup tank crew competition, the head judge continued. In third place, Fort Hood. Polite applause greeted this announcement as the Fort Hood commander stepped forward to receive the bronze trophy. In second place, the judge paused for effect, Fort Benning. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Hayes's expression was one of pure disbelief. He had entered the competition as the overwhelming favorite, with the newest equipment in the backing of senior Pentagon officials. To finish second was unthinkable. And the winner of the 2025 Sullivan Cup, demonstrating exceptional skill, teamwork, and tactical judgment across all phases of the competition, Fort Knox. Cheers erupted from the Knox contingent as Thornton stepped forward to accept the trophy. Washington, Carter, and Wilson stood beside him, their faces glowing with triumph. They had done it. Against all odds, against superior technology and political pressure, they had proven that the human element remained the decisive factor in tank warfare. As Thornton raised his trophy, his eyes met Hayes's across the crowd. The other colonel's face was a mask of barely contained fury. He had staked his reputation and his vision for armor's future on this competition, and he had lost. Not because his technology had failed, though it had shown limitations, but because Thornton's crew had demonstrated the irreplaceable value of human skill, judgment, and teamwork. The implications would reverberate far beyond the competition itself. The congressional observers had witnessed firsthand the limitations of over-reliance on technology. The senior officers present had seen the value of maintaining fundamental skills even as systems became more advanced. The narrative Hayes had been crafting, of obsolete traditions giving way to technological inevitability, had been thoroughly undermined. After the ceremony, as the teams began to disperse, Hayes approached Thornton. His anger had cooled, replaced by a grudging respect. "Congratulations, Thornton," he said stiffly. "Your team performed impressively." "Thank you, Colonel. Your system has potential. It's just not ready to replace human crews yet." Hayes nodded curtly. "Perhaps not, but the future is coming, whether we're ready or not." "I don't disagree," Thornton replied. "The disagreement is about what that future should look like. Technology enhancing soldiers, not replacing them. Systems serving warriors, not the other way around." They parted without further words, two men with fundamentally different visions of warfare's future. But Thornton knew the competition's outcome had shifted the balance of the debate. Hayes's technological revolution would be tempered by the enduring truth Thornton's team had demonstrated, that in the chaos and uncertainty of combat, the human element remained irreplaceable. Later that evening, after the official celebration had concluded, Thornton found himself alone with his crew in the maintenance bay where they had spent so many hours preparing. The Sullivan Cup trophy sat on a workbench, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "I requested this moment alone with you before we all go our separate ways," Thornton told them. "I wanted to thank you properly without the cameras and speeches." He looked at each of them in turn, Carter with her intelligence and attention to detail, Washington with his strength and resilience, Wilson with his technical brilliance and adaptability. "When I took this assignment, I saw it as my final mission before retirement, a last chance to defend the traditions and values I believe in. What I didn't expect was to find a crew that would remind me why those traditions matter in the first place." He moved to each of them, shaking their hands with genuine emotion. "Lieutenant Carter, your development as an officer has been remarkable. You've learned to balance precision with intuition, technology with fundamentals. You'll make an outstanding tank commander." Carter straightened proudly. Thank you, sir. That means everything coming from you. To Washington, he said, Sergeant, your courage goes far beyond the battlefield. Facing your past, confronting those memories. That takes a special kind of strength. I'm honored to have served with you. Washington's normally stoic expression softened. The honor was mine, sir. You helped me find peace I didn't think was possible. Finally, to Wilson, Sergeant, you challenged my thinking, pushed me to reconsider my own biases. Your technical expertise was invaluable, but your willingness to embrace the human element alongside technology was your greatest contribution. Wilson smiled. Turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks, sir, and a young one can learn a few old ones. Thornton chuckled at that. Indeed, the future of armor isn't about choosing between tradition and innovation. It's about finding the perfect balance between the two. You three embody that balance. He stepped back, regarding them with undisguised pride. My retirement becomes official next month. When I leave, I do so knowing the Armor Corps is in good hands. Your hands, remember what we achieved here. Not just a victory in competition, but a statement about what matters most in warfare. The unbreakable bond between soldiers who fight together, trusting each other with their lives. Washington raised a spontaneous toast with his water bottle. To Iron Thunder. To Iron Thunder, the others echoed. As Thornton left the maintenance bay that night, he felt a profound sense of completion. His career had come full circle, from the young lieutenant leading tanks in Desert Storm to the colonel defending the soul of the Armor Corps in his final assignment. He had done his duty. He had kept faith with the traditions that had shaped him. And most importantly, he had ensured those traditions would continue, adapted for a new era, but never abandoned. The tanks would roll on, steel giants on the battlefield, but their true power would always come from the men and women inside. Their courage, their skill, their judgment. That was the lesson of the Sullivan Cup. That was the legacy of Jack Thunder Thornton. And that was a victory more meaningful than any trophy could represent. 3 months later, Fort Knox, Kentucky, August 12, 2025. The summer heat shimmered above the parade ground where a formation of tanks stood at perfect intervals, their crews standing at attention beside them. Flags snapped in the hot breeze, and the assembled crowd of soldiers and civilians watched as a silver-haired man in the dress uniform of an Army colonel approached the podium. Colonel Jack Thornton surveyed the scene before him, emotions welling beneath his disciplined exterior. This was his retirement ceremony, the formal end to 37 years of service. Among the distinguished guests were General Montgomery, several members of Congress whose support had been crucial in maintaining armor funding, and most importantly to Thornton, the crew of Iron Thunder. Lieutenant Carter, now Captain Carter following her recent promotion, stood tall in her dress uniform, the new insignia gleaming on her shoulders. She had been assigned as company commander in the 1st Armored Division, a prestigious posting that would continue her rapid ascent through the ranks. Sergeant Washington remained at Fort Knox, now serving as the senior instructor for the Armor School's Tank Commander course. His experience and his personal journey had made him uniquely qualified to prepare the next generation of tankers for the psychological as well as technical challenges of armored warfare. Sergeant Wilson, to everyone's surprise, had declined an offer to join an advanced technology development team at Fort Benning. Instead, he had re-enlisted for another term with combat forces, determined to apply his technical expertise in the field rather than the laboratory. He would deploy with the next rotation to Eastern Europe, where American armor forces continued to demonstrate their relevance in an increasingly contested environment. As Thornton stepped to the microphone, he set aside his prepared remarks. The formal speech, with its customary acknowledgments and reminiscences, suddenly seemed inadequate for the moment. 37 years ago, I raised my right hand and took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, he began, his voice carrying across the parade ground. I renew that oath today, even as I prepare to hang up this uniform for the last time. He paused, his gaze moving across the assembled tanks and their crews. Throughout my career, I've been privileged to serve alongside the finest men and women our nation produces. From the sands of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, I've witnessed courage, sacrifice, and devotion to duty that humble and inspire me to this day. Thornton's eyes found his Iron Thunder crew in the crowd. Recently, I was reminded of an essential truth about our profession. We live in an age of technological marvels, of systems and capabilities previous generations could only dream of. These tools have their place, their purpose. But the heart of our army, the soul of our armor corps, remains the soldier. Not the machine, but the human being who operates it, who makes decisions under pressure, who fights not just with weapons, but with judgment, initiative, and moral courage. He gestured toward the line of tanks behind him. These magnificent machines represent American industrial might and engineering excellence. But their true power comes from the crews who bring them to life. Four individuals working in perfect harmony, trusting each other with their lives, forming a bond that transcends the mechanical. Thornton straightened, his voice gaining strength. As I depart, I leave with full confidence in the future of the Armor Corps. Not because of any particular weapon system or technology, but because of the quality of the soldiers who will carry on its proud traditions. Traditions not of blind adherence to the past, but of excellence, adaptation, and the unbreakable spirit that has defined American tankers since the first M4 Shermans rolled into combat 8 decades ago. He concluded with words that carried special meaning for those who had shared the struggle and triumph of the Sullivan Cup. In tanks, we say iron thunder to describe the sound and fury of armor in battle. But the true thunder is not in the engines or guns. It's in the hearts of the soldiers who serve. It has been the honor of my life to stand among you, to lead and be led by you, to share in that thunder. Thank you, and God bless America. The applause that followed was heartfelt, particularly from those who understood the deeper significance of his words. The Sullivan Cup victory had indeed changed the conversation about armor's future. While technological development continued, there was a renewed appreciation for the human dimension of armored warfare, for the skills and judgment that no system could fully replicate. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Captain Carter approached Thornton with Washington and Wilson beside her. "Permission to speak freely one last time, sir?" she asked with a smile. "Always, Captain. We wanted you to know that Iron Thunder lives on. Not just the tank, but what it represents. The lessons you taught us, the standards you set, we're carrying them forward." Washington nodded agreement. "My students hear about you every day, sir, about Ramadi, about Desert Storm, about the Sullivan Cup. Your legacy is secure." Wilson, typically the most reserved of the three, added, "And about finding the balance, sir. Technology serving soldiers, not replacing them. That's the future we're building." Thornton was moved by their words, by the knowledge that the principles he had fought to defend would continue through these exceptional soldiers and countless others like them. "I couldn't ask for a finer legacy," he told them, "or better stewards to carry it forward." As they exchanged final handshakes and farewells, Thornton felt not the melancholy he had expected on this day, but a profound sense of fulfillment. His career had ended not with a whimper, but with thunder, iron thunder, that would echo through the Armor Corps for years to come. He turned for one last look at the assembled tanks gleaming in the summer sun, steel giants, symbols of American power and resolve. But more than that, homes to the crews who gave them purpose and direction, who transformed metal and machinery into instruments of national will. That was the essence of armor. Not the tank itself, but the perfect union of human and machine. Not technology alone, but technology guided by courage, judgment, and the unbreakable bonds forged in training and tempered in combat. Iron Thunder. The sound would fade as Thornton entered civilian life, but the meaning would remain with him always. And in the tankers who followed, it would live on, generation after generation, as long as there were soldiers willing to close the hatch and move forward into danger.